Hello, hello, hello. Hello, is everybody in? Is everybody in? CHRNIK, thank you for that, my brother. Yeah. That was CHRNIK, you guys. Thank you, my brother. You're amazing. Everyone listening is amazing. We are at Bicycle Day. Welcome to Bicycle Day, everyone. Meet Delic's Bicycle Day 2020, the 77th anniversary of Albert Hofmann's accidental discovery of LSD. You know her, you've heard her name whispered in locker rooms and swept under your parents' rug. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about acid, or Lucy, as I like to call her. And by the way, can we vote possibly to change the name? Acid, maybe not such a good marketing tool. All right. LSD, of course, also known as lysergic acid dithylamide. Everyone say that with me. Lysergic acid dithylamide is one of the more significant chemical compound discoveries in the last 80 years. We're here today celebrating its discovery and all the people that it has helped. But most importantly, what we're really celebrating, ladies and gentlemen, drum roll please, is you. Yes, we're celebrating all of you. You are amazing. We are amazing. Today is all about you. I created Delic to reframe the psychedelic conversation to include everyone. No longer are the doors of perception held by a select few. Oh no, they are held by all of you. You are the question and the answer. You are the best drug money can't buy. So before we take a ride on this magic school bus, here are the rules. All right, number one, what do you say we set an intention? Take a second, clear your mind, imagine what you want to get out of today. Imagine what you want to get out of listening to these experts and these amazing artists. Say it in your mind, say it out loud. All right, that's number one. Number two, super important, don't harass each other in the comments. This is a safe space. We are not your bitch. Don't hang your shit on us. We're here to change the world, not your diaper. So if anyone's trolling, go away. This is a safe space. We don't want you here. Number three, super important. Raise your hand if you know what DSB stands for. DSB. Also known as drug-seeking behavior. Don't be silly. Don't be dumb. We do not sell drugs here. That is not the point of this. This is education and fun and knowledge. Let's get that out of the way. Also, really important, today we're celebrating Decrim California. Later on, you're going to hear Ryan from Decrim CA talk about his efforts and his organization's efforts to decriminalize psilocybin in California and beyond. So you can donate to them at Meet_Delic on Venmo. 100% of the proceeds go to Decrim California. You can also visit them, decrimca.org. And we're here for you. The most important thing, we're here for you. Ask questions. All righty. We also have giveaways. Amazing. We have lots of giveaways. Thank you to all the people who donated. I'm going to show you what we have. After every speaker, we'll do questions and giveaways. And it's very, very important that if you win, you send your information to info@meetdelic.com so we can ship you your items. Like I said, each segment is only 15 to 20 minutes long, so pay attention. And also, please, please, please go and visit these amazing experts after this broadcast to learn more about the good work that they're doing. Towards the end, we're going to integrate with some visual reality. They marry sounds and visuals like no other. It's going to be super amazing, super trippy. And then we're going to end and let you guys go to your bicycle day. So let's get into it, shall we? School's in session. Let's feed our heads, guys. All righty. In 1985, psychology professor Thomas B. Roberts at Northern Illinois University founded the first Bicycle Day celebration at his home. In his own words, I had originally wanted to celebrate the 16th, but that year the 16th was midweek and not a good day for a party. And the 19th was on a weekend. So I decided to celebrate the first international LSD exposure then. Hence, here we are, Bicycle Day, April 19th, 2020. Dr. Thomas Roberts promotes the legal adaptation of psychedelics for multidisciplinary intellectual uses. This is a mouthful, but it's important, super interesting, guys. Primarily, their academic and spiritual implications. He formulated multi-state theory, coined single-state fallacy, mind app, neurosingularity, meta-intelligence, the impossible problem, mind app AI, and ideagen, and he named and characterized the entheogen reformation of 2016. You can get his new book, Mind Apps, on Amazon. Dr. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you. Okay, so let's start with an easy question. What is Bicycle Day?
Okay, well, I guess everybody here knows it. It's today I decided to name Bicycle Day in honor of Albert Hofmann's first intentional psychedelic experience. Originally, he had his first experience on a Friday the 16th, which he thought was a small accidental dose. And on Monday the 19th, he had his intentional first trip, which he thought would be a dose so low it would hardly show up. Instead, he had 250 mics, which is enough for a good solid trip.
Right. And so what was your relationship like with Hofmann, and how did he feel about the creation of Bicycle Day?
I wrote to him. We corresponded back and forth back in the hard copy mail days. So it took a couple of days for things to go back and forth. I told him he was a little angry or ticked off. He said, "Why do you Americans pay attention to the bicycle? What's important is the LSD molecule." And I can see that. I explained it to him that, well, we have a much more solid view of what a bicycle would look like rather than just the structure of a molecule. A bicycle is more important. And then we got to talk about his ride home. And he sort of came around to it. Then I explained to him that there's a famous event in American history, Paul Revere's ride, that happened on the 18th of April. And of course, the 19th of April in Switzerland would be the 18th of April here for a few hours at any rate. So I told him about the famous Paul Revere poem and said that they both sort of started a new revolution in society. And I think he warmed up to the idea after he saw it was just not paying attention to the Bicycle Day. I asked him if he still had the bicycle. I'd like to buy it from him, but he didn't have it anymore.
Got it. Well, I think that was a good move on your part. Bicycle is like a thing people can relate to. It's fun. And I have had LSD experiences on a bicycle, and I can tell you, although I don't recommend it, of course, we do not recommend consuming any illegal substance.
No.
But if you find yourself in that position, LSD is a very interesting substance that allows for movement in that way, whereas other substances, it might not be so safe. I've also hurt myself. So again, not recommended, but it's a very interesting chemical compound in that regard. So, okay, let's talk about your book, your recent book, Mind Apps. I think it's so important when you talk about using psychedelics as mind strengtheners. That's always how I've personally seen them, right? They're sort of hacks to improving your brain functionality, of course, to expanding your consciousness and all of these things. And that was like a mouthful, what I said in your introduction, but I think it's amazing work. And I want you to kind of give us the 411 on mind apps and why you think it's important to talk about the use of psychedelics as mind strengtheners.
I invented the word mind app to make the point that just as we can write apps and install them in our devices, there are apps we can install on our brain mind complex. And psychedelics are one of the families of a whole bunch of different ones. And they allow us to do different things with our cognitive and thinking processes. Now, probably everybody who's watching this show knows that. But what I'm trying to point out is this isn't just entertainment. You can do some really good thinking and raise lots of questions and answer some questions that normally aren't answered. So I see psychedelics as a family of mind apps, and there are lots of others like meditation and hypnosis and breathing techniques and martial arts and yoga and on and on. What I'm trying to do is to get people to think of all these things which have been sort of on the fringes of psychology, to bring them onto the center and to see them all as different types of mind apps rather than a number of separate things sort of floating around out there by themselves. And these are all different mind apps and allow us to use our minds in different ways and probably think thoughts we haven't thought before and perceive things we haven't perceived before. So it's an attempt to expand the idea of what people think of as their mind and what we can do with their minds.
Absolutely. You and I have talked a bit about ideagens, and I think our shared belief that psychedelics aren't, listen, I don't believe that they're gonna on their own save the world, just like cannabis didn't save the world. We're gonna save ourselves ultimately, or not. But talk about their like ideagens, your concept of ideagen and how people can conceptualize that with a psychedelic lifestyle.
Yeah, well, we use the word entheogen for the use of psychedelics in a religious or spiritual way. So I'm just making a parallel and say an ideagen. The psychedelics generate ideas, and that's where ideagen. And then they allow us to think things we haven't thought before with new ideas, but also to use psychedelics as ways to examine things that have been difficult to examine, like the consciousness. One of the real problems in consciousness is called the hard problem. That is, how does the biology of our brain result in our subjective experience? And basically, the only sample we have of that is our ordinary default awake state. But with psychedelics, we can have more examples. And the more examples we have, the more we might learn about that process. So it generates research in that sense. Probably everybody who's watching this show has had the experience that say, this is real. This is really real. This is realer than real. Now, this means we can do experimental studies in reality, right? Rather than just sitting back in an armchair and thinking about reality as philosophers do. They can actually do experimental philosophy. But it's not just reality, but beauty. Certainly everybody on this show, watching this show, has had the sense of intense beauty, things beautiful that they didn't know would be beautiful. I mean, not just art and music and things like that, but maybe even something as minor as the back of your thumb or your fingernail. You can see the beauty in that. So you can do experiments in beauty the same way. And in truth, because we probably all had the idea, oh, this is a great idea I'm having. Now, maybe it isn't, maybe it isn't. But our ordinary state is like that too. Sometimes we have great ideas and sometimes we think they're great ideas, but they're not. So we can use this to study all these various things. And of course, sacredness is the word that comes up before entheogen. So it allows us to do a lot of different experiments in all these fields that people used to just like sit in an armchair and think about. They can actually go out and experience these. So I used the idea of a rheostat of the mind. And just as a rheostat or an amplifier can increase the temperature in a room or the sound, what these do is increase the sense of truth or beauty or sacredness and reality. And so this is a whole type of philosophical research that can be done. And psychedelics are really primed for that. But these other mind apps too, in their own ways. my favorite are psychedelics because they're so powerful.
Right. Very efficient.
Yes, yes.
So I'm just now noticing your amazing jacket with patches on there. It looks
Oh,
like
this is
bicycle
the-
day patches.
This is the original Bicycle Day jacket. I've grown out of it since I originally had it. Let me see if I can get.
Oh
There's one of
yeah.
the patches, and there's another one of the patches. This one has a gold bicycle on it, and that's to represent the golden anniversary of Hofmann's trip in 1943. There was a conference in San Francisco in 93 to celebrate the 50th anniversary. So I made this patch with the golden bicycle for the golden anniversary. I didn't make patches every year, maybe 3 or 4 different ones, but at any rate, I've enjoyed. They've become sort of a symbol of the experience. And of course, there's this one. Oops.
Yeah, that looks like you're in the Swiss mountains. You got
Yeah,
Goofy.
this is one. This there's a story about Goofy.
What's the story?
Well, my daughter was interested in Minnie Mouse, and she called herself Little Minnie, and there was Big Minnie. My wife was Mickey, so I got the role of Goofy. So I'm Goofy in the Minnie Mouse or Mickey Mouse series. So that's where that came from. So another important thing about psychedelics and generating ideas is Stan Grof's work. I consider him really the prime psychoanalyst of psychedelics. And he came up with a map of the mind that helps us interpret things like movies and plays and books and so forth. In my class that I taught at Northern, I do an analysis of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs using Grof's view of the mind. And then the students would do their own movies or life events. It's a very rich way of thinking about our minds.
Absolutely. Okay, so take us back to the first Bicycle Day celebration. I think you told me that it was in your backyard. What was that like, and how big was it, and who was there?
Yeah,
What did you do?
when people think of Bicycle Day celebrations, I mean, they think of hundreds or thousands of people probably tripping or having a wild time. It wasn't like that at all. In Illinois, sometimes the weather is very nice on the Bicycle Day and sometimes it isn't. So sometimes I have it in the backyard and sometimes in the house. And the first day I invited probably half a dozen or a few, maybe 8 or 10 people. And there were some children there. It was more like a family picnic than sort of a hippie celebration. And we'd get together every year, more or less the same people. And it was a reason to get together. So basically it was a very calm kind of experience. And if it was a nice day, we'd enjoy the weather. And if it wasn't a nice day, we'd be inside. So then I decided to send a notice to the MAPS Bulletin. Back in the days when the MAPS Bulletin was paper. And they printed it in there, and that started to get the word out. So I've been really pleased by the way that word is spread. There was a group locally called a band called Bicycle Day. Oh, they moved from here up to Madison. We're about 60 miles west of Chicago. And so, Bicycle Day just has caught on, and there's this event and there are other events elsewhere. So I'm both very delighted and a little annoyed by it. I'm delighted that the day has caught on, but I'm annoyed because my best work is scholarly intellectual work. Okay, but I'm noted for Bicycle Day, so I'll just have to sort of go with that. But my idea of using psychedelics as idea gens, I think, is the most important part of my work. And if I can put up this book here, let me see.
Please do.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, there's Mind Apps. That's the current book that's out. Also, it's available as a recorded book too. And,
Okay, so people can get that on Amazon, and
Yeah.
we'll give people the link to all this stuff in a follow-up email after the show.
Good. Amazon is the cheapest price, so I recommend there. You can get other places and pay more, but that's the place to go.
Cool. Thomas, before we let you go, let's ask or answer maybe some audience questions. Let's get into it. Okay, so here's one. How do you think LSD will factor into the psychedelics revolution that is currently taking place?
Well, it's going to be the leader eventually. I mean, right now,
I like the sound of that.
Psilocybin is the leader with an ayahuasca, which sort of came out of nowhere and now is very prominent. So I think eventually we'll get into psychedelics, but LSD still has such a bad rap that psilocybin is used. And of course, psilocybin is nicer for the psychotherapist because it lasts around 6 hours rather than 8 or 10 or 12 hours. So it works that way very nicely. The difference is really only in the amount of dose rather than the effects.
Of course, dose in LSD is wildly important. And of course, the popularity of microdosing substances like LSD is increasing in popularity, but also should be considered extremely thoughtfully, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. I think that actually the big use of psychedelics is going to be in problem solving. Jim Fadiman has written about that in the Psychedelic Guide. I really recommend that book. It's an absolutely fantastic book. And what it shows is that psychedelics can be used for problem solving in a lot of different fields. So we have psychotherapy and we have religion, we have scholarly work, but they all can use problem solving because they all have problems. And I think that will eventually be the big one. Whether or not we'll see it in the next 20 years, I don't know, but that's really the direction I think people will find, the field will finally go.
Copy. All right, this one is from Jonathan, and a loaded question indeed. Do you agree with the stoned ape theory? Can you talk about what that is and if you agree or disagree?
No, that's Terence McKenna's idea that it's the apes who ate some mushrooms and sort of developed us into humans. I think it's a wonderful sort of idea, but I don't think it happened. It's one of those nice things that I think it would have been nice if it happened, but I just can't see it really happening. Now, probably apes ate stones. I mean, apes ate shrooms, there's no doubt about that, just as humans did. But I see no reason to suppose that, to develop that into an idea of how we sort of developed our own minds.
Copy. Okay, so let's do a giveaway. How about we do a giveaway of your book? We'll make that happen after the show, but love to give away a signed copy from Dr. Thomas of his book, Mind Apps. How do you feel about that?
Sure, be glad to.
Okay, cool. All right, I say, Kit, thank you on Zoom. Kit, you get a signed copy of Mind Apps from Dr. Thomas Roberts. We need your shipping information. Please email info@meetdelic.com. Kit, congratulations. Dr. Thomas Roberts, I'm such a fan of your work and the way you talk about the potential use of psychedelics, and especially the idea that we can use them to solve problems. I think that's what we're all trying. Exactly. That's what we're trying to do here. Be creative and solve problems, and more love, less fighting. So we appreciate you so much. Anything else you want the people to know about you and your work before we move on?
Well, there'll be some, you'll have some in your website, the stuff I've sent you, right? So
yeah.
So, okay, good. Thanks for putting on this show. I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of it.
Thank you. All righty. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, we have the executive director of Dancesafe.org. Yes, you recognize the name if you were a child of the 90s and went to raves. Dancesafe has been around since 1998, originally founded in San Francisco, of course. They have quickly become internationally recognized, I'd say, harm reduction org. Here to talk about safety and why safety is cool, Mitchell Gomez.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Hi, Mitchell.
All right, sounds great. Yeah, hi everyone. Happy Bicycle Day. Yeah, I guess I'll just dive right into it.
Do it.
The sort of promise and the peril of the classical psychedelics, particularly LSD, is that physiologically, medical professionals will often describe them as non-toxic, right? So a really important metric with a lot of drugs is effective dose to like potentially lethal dose. You know, how many times do you have to repeat an effective dose to have like a physiological problem? And the reality with LSD is that we don't even know, because there's no known fatal dose for LSD. If LSD is actually LSD, we don't know what dose would actually, physiologically harm a person. And so they get this reputation of being just like really, really safe. And the reality is there are some real risks. And so it's important to recognize that just because physiologically there's no known fatal dose does not necessarily mean that a substance is completely risk-free. That being said, most of the sort of harms associated with LSD use are actually harms that we can directly attribute to drug prohibition. These are harms that are created explicitly because LSD is illegal. They're harms that are created by unregulated black markets, by people not having the information they need, and also by not really knowing what a dose is. Because no matter what a person tells you, when you take a piece of paper that was, the LSD crystal was created in a black market, it was laid on the paper in a black market, it's really hard to know what amount of LSD might be on a given piece of paper.
Can we talk about, real quick, I don't want to interrupt you, but
Yeah, please.
Can we talk about the blotter paper thing? Obviously, it's a useful way to transfer liquid,
Sure.
but there are lots of funky chemicals, sometimes formaldehyde. Like, you don't know what's on the blotter paper that you're using to consume this super powerful substance. And in my experience, those things interact with the chemical and create an entirely different experience altogether when talking about LSD, right?
Yeah, so the issue is not so much real LSD plus other chemicals. The issue is that often what gets put onto blotter paper is not actually LSD. So there's a whole galaxy of research chemicals out there. Some of them are relatively benign. Some of them are, pharmacologically and physiologically pretty close to LSD. So 1P-LSD is a drug that's become quite popular in the last few years. It fits on blotter. It's relatively close to LSD in terms of effect and safety. A lot of people think that it's actually probably a prodrug to LSD, so your body is converting it into LSD. But then there's also drugs out there like 2,5-IN-bomb, which is a drug that for a long time was legal. You could buy it on the internet with a credit card. So people were buying it all the time, putting it on blotter paper, calling it LSD. And we don't really know the exact numbers, but certainly hundreds of people were killed after taking 2,5-IN-bomb, thinking that it was LSD. And they didn't die from running out into traffic or behavioral things, which are things that can, happen on psychedelics. These were multiple systemic organ failures. These were drug deaths created by the drug that was being represented as a drug that's non-toxic. But thankfully, there's solutions. The two best solutions are that you have to just chemically analyze what you're consuming yourself. You can do this in one of two ways broadly. The first is sending it off to a lab. So the lab that Dancesafe works with is drugsdata.org. This is a lab that was originally started to do drug analysis for various organizations. Dancesafe very early on contracted with this lab to be able to send things in and put them online. The program is actually managed now by Erowid. And so we are eternally thankful to Earth and Fire for taking this program and running with it so that we don't have to. And so drugsdata.org, they have a DEA Schedule 1 receiving license. They can legally receive substances in the mail. So there's a protocol for submitting samples. It's all online. You can go look at that. The other way is that Dancesafe makes these LSD test kits. So these are on our website. They basically react with any indole. So LSD and psilocybin both will react with them. The instructions for testing are on there.
Wait, can you show the camera? Show the people that test again.
Yeah,
testing is such a big issue.
Yeah, so these are our LSD test kits. You can see the color purple there. It's a little hard to see on this lighting, but it turns this really, really beautiful purple. Oh, it's actually the purple sort of generally of the background of the chart. And so any indole like LSD turns purple when you put this little chemical on it. So you literally just take a tenth of a hit. It takes a very, very small amount of paper. So a tenth of a piece of blotter, put it on a non-reactive ceramic surface, drop this chemical on there, wait a few minutes. And it doesn't mean that the substance is safe, right? That's a different term, but it does mean that there's an indole, which means that it's almost certainly LSD. And so, yeah, these kits are really handy. They're $20 and they do 60 tests. So we want people testing for their friends. It's a philosophical decision to make them large, so that when you get one, you can test for your friends. If you're at a festival, when festivals someday start again, you can loan the kits out to people in the campground. And I also created a coupon code till the end of the month. So if you just use the coupon code DELIC, it'll be 20% off, I believe. Let me check my little notes down here. Yeah, 20% off. So if you just go to the go to the dancesafe.org, order these kits, and the coupon code is DELIC. So yeah, that's one of the big dangers is misrepresentation. It's also important, to have the correct set and setting. This is something that's talked about a lot in psychedelic circles. So it's really, set being mindset. You really want to make sure that you're in a place where you're, wanting to explore these substances. Psychedelics are unpredictable often. And so if you, go into it with a really sort of dark mindset, things can go sideways. And setting just being the sort of like the physical location that you're using psychedelics. There's some really horrifying stories out there about people taking psychedelics in casual ways in very public places and having things go really wrong. And so just having the ability to like create the proper set and setting for exploring these things, I think is really important. I'm also a really big fan of having a sitter. Not everybody is in that boat, that there should be a sober person there keeping an eye on the situation. I've always personally been a really big fan of that model where you have a person who knows how to deal with difficult psychedelic experiences, which used to be a skill you just had to sort of learn on the job, it was all on the job training. Now there's organizations like Zendo and Harmonia that are out there that will teach you how to deal with these things. The manual of psychedelic support sits right here on my bookshelf for a very good reason. And so, yeah, having those things, set up so that don't go into it expecting something to go wrong, but so that if something does, I don't even want to say wrong, if something does go difficult,
yes,
having somebody there who can help you, I'm a big fan of, I really, really am. Having seen things go difficult for people, way more often than most people will ever see it, right? I spend a lot of time at festivals. I spend a lot of time doing on the ground harm reduction. And often that means people coming to the Dancesafe booth because either they or their friends are having a really difficult night. And so I've spent a lot of my time over the last, half a decade sitting with people who are having really difficult psychedelic experiences. And it's really humbling. It's really humbling to see how those difficult experiences can be transformed into positive outcomes. And people often leave those experiences really grateful for them. But in the moment, there are things that you have to learn how to deal with, and it's worth learning how to do that.
Oh, can you imagine if all of us, did a basic course, kind of like a CPR certification for this? And so what's like the number one or number two things that a sitter would want to know if they're in a situation and they're sober and they're able to help a friend with a challenging situation?
I think the two most important things are remembering that a person is going to feed off of your reaction to them. And so even if they seem to be having a really difficult experience,
Don't
often,
freak out.
Showing overt concern or pity can often sort of exacerbate the situation. I found you want to remain positive as the sitter, that this is not a bad trip, it's a difficult trip, and that these can be transformed into positive experiences. And the other one is just, remembering that you're not trying to talk a person down. There is no down. Psychedelics require metabolization. Until the drugs are metabolized, the person is not going to magically become sober because of anything you say to them. And so just being supportive and talking them through the experience, rather than having this idea that like, oh, we can talk them down from this experience. I think those are real big takeaways. But I really, really do recommend, if you're interested in this, either attending a training for psychedelic harm reduction or integration in person, or there's also videos on YouTube of these trainings. So if you go to YouTube and you search, Zendo or Harmonia, or there's a lot of harm reduction groups out there that do this sort of work. And also doing the Dancesafe training, although the Dancesafe training is much more heavily focused on education and pre-consumption harm reduction. We really focus a lot on drug misrepresentation. So learning how to test people's drugs and learning to, how to message that to them so that they recognize what drug testing can tell them and what it can't.
So you guys are, some of the foremost experts on the legalities, right? Because you've been doing it for such a long time and you've faced the challenges and found solutions. I would imagine that there's a barrier between a consumer who maybe wants to come up and talk to you guys at a festival or wants to be safer and learn how to test, but feels maybe, oh, I don't know, is it illegal to even have a test? Like, should I even go to the Dancesafe.org website? Like, what What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been doing on-site testing at festivals for going on 22 years now. In all of that time, we've never had a testing patron, a volunteer, or an employee have any sort of legal trouble. What really allows us to operate is not the letter of the law. Under the letter of the law, there's an awful lot of things we do that are gray at best. What really saves us, what allows us to operate, is the political optics of law enforcement making drug use more dangerous, right? So when we set up at an event and we're doing on-site testing, particularly now with fentanyl showing up in non-opioid drugs. So we see fentanyl in cocaine, we've seen it in MDMA, we've seen it in MDA. We've actually seen carfentanil laid on blotter, although that was being sold as an opiate. It wasn't being misrepresented as LSD. But we have seen blotter even that had fentanyl on it, or carfentanil, I should say. And so the political optics of law enforcement stopping the people who are trying to stop fentanyl misrepresentation deaths are really bad. And every district attorney, every sheriff, they always have an election coming up, right? And so what saves us is the political reality, not the letter of the law. Under the letter of the law, in a lot of states, test kits, you could argue, are drug paraphernalia. We've been working on fixing this state by state. We got a DPA grant this year. The Drug Policy Alliance gave us a grant this year to create a 50-state plan that's going to allow us to have the sort of infrastructure to try to change this in every state. But right now, there's 30-ish states where you could argue that the test kits are paraphernalia. And if they find a test kit with other drugs, they will often add a paraphernalia charge, just like they'll do with a baggie or with a scale. There's a lot of things. I personally know somebody who was once charged with 98 counts of paraphernalia for 98 Ziploc bags that were in their kitchen counter, and the 2 other bags were in their kitchen, right? So it's about the police trying to create a need for you to plead your case down. We ship test kits to all 50 states. We ship them all over the world. We have not been able to find any case where a person was charged for just a test kit. And we've looked. I mean, we've actively tried to figure out if that's ever happened. And as far as we can tell, it's never happened. Now, if they find, a bag of MDMA with your MDMA test kit, they will often add a paraphernalia charge for that test kit. But coming to the booth, going to the website, ordering the test kits, all of those things are very safe. We've been doing them for 22 years. Nobody's ever gotten in trouble. And I don't anticipate anyone ever getting in trouble. It's just the political optics of shutting us down are terrible.
Yeah. Okay. So let's reiterate because you mentioned a lot of resources, the book behind you, and how people can get involved. I feel like you guys have such a breadth of knowledge of what practically actually works to make this shift and change in the failed war on drugs. And I respect what you guys do so much, and you're so clear on your messaging. So talk about where people can find out more about how to help you guys move the needle.
The one last thing I wanted to say before I listed off resources.
Oh yeah, please do.
There is one sort of real risk to all of the psychedelics that I really think it's important people know, which is that in cases of pre-existing sort of set for mental illness, people who have particularly schizophrenic or bipolar parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, they have a genetic predisposition towards those types of mental illness. There has been a lot of anecdotal data over the years that taking psychedelics can often trigger those sorts of mental illnesses in people who have a close genetic relationship to people who have those things. And so I think that's just a thing to know. I don't ever tell a person whether or not to take a substance. I truly believe that every individual has the right to make those decisions. If you have very close genetic family that has schizophrenia or other major psychiatric disorders, it's a thing worth knowing that psychedelics have occasionally induced those mental illnesses in people with that predisposition. It's not that's sort of where the urban legend came from, that like, oh, if you take LSD 7 times, you're legally insane, or oh, I know somebody who took LSD and it made them schizophrenic. With people who don't have those genetic predispositions, there's very, 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 very little evidence anywhere that these things cause any sort of major issues like that. But with people who do have those pre-existing genetic factors, it's a thing worth knowing. Now onto the resources. The lab is drugsdata.org. And there's a submit your sample tab. You just click on that and read through the instructions. The test kits are available on dancesafe.org. So we make test kits for a bunch of different substances, for LSD, MDMA, MDA, ketamine, cocaine, fentanyl test strips, all sorts of great drug checking tech. And the coupon code is DELIC, so just DELIC, and that'll take 20% off of any of the test kits, so not just the LSD test kit. The book I mentioned was the Manual of Psychedelic Support, which was put out by MAPS. There's also a great new resource that was just released. Where did I put that? Oh, there we go. So if you just Google "It's Okay, Psychedelic Harm Reduction," this is a new series of pamphlets that are being put out by Adam Rubin. Just a spectacular harm reductionist. I really love his work. And then also dancesafe.org, if you want to learn how to be a Dancesafe volunteer, our training is online. Once you're trained as a volunteer, you're put into our master database of all of the national volunteers. And when we have large national events, we email all of our volunteers for those opportunities. We do some of the largest events every year, all the way down to like little house parties that our local chapters do. And so in a normal season, there's lots of volunteer opportunities. Obviously, this year is a very different situation, but in our normal year, there's lots and lots of volunteer opportunities throughout the year if you want to get your feet wet with harm reduction, with learning how to sort of provide this support that people need to have these really amazing transformative experiences. Because I really do think that these tools are really, really, really powerful pieces of technology that we have to create a better world. And so I want them to be as safe as possible. And it's really unfortunate that most of what I do is mitigating the harms of government policy. If you could buy LSD from a licensed, regulated provider, you could have, a QR coded LSD blotter that would tell you who manufactured it, the date of manufacturing, how many micrograms per square. There would be consistency. There would be, legality. People who are having difficult experiences wouldn't be afraid to call for help because of this fear of legal repercussions. So we can really make all of this go away if we can just create a sort of cognitive liberty argument for the legalization of all drugs.
Preach, brother. Before I let you go, there's been a lot of questions naturally about microdosing. I try not to, as a company, support any sort of specific dosing, right? That's not what we do. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I mean, with black market laid blotter, there's often a lot of inconsistency. This is something I have personally experienced, where 1 square of LSD off of a 10 strip of LSD is noticeably stronger than other squares. That's a thing that happens. And so the reality with microdosing is that, there's a lot of good guides out there on volumetric dosing about how to sort of do that in a safe way. I think it was Tim Leary who said you could always take more later, but you can never take less later.
So true.
So it's always worth, starting low and working your way up instead of starting high, because once it's in your bloodstream, it's in your bloodstream, and that's where you're at.
Yeah. I've had an accidental macrodose or two.
Yeah, accidental macrodosing. Yeah. But again, in terms of physiological safety, we have reports in the medical literature of people who accidentally consumed thousands of doses of LSD and lived, literally thousands. There was one who the blood serum levels of LSD in their blood indicated they probably took somewhere around 6,000 to 7,000 doses. And that person lived. They did not die from consuming that. It was actually a jar of powder they found that they thought was cocaine, and they snorted a line of crystal LSD on accident.
Wow.
Yeah. Not recommending anyone do that, but I am saying that we have a report in the medical literature of that happening, and the person didn't die, right? So, if you're trying to microdose and go to an office, obviously it's not ideal if you end up tripping at work. And so sort of maybe figuring out what your volumetric dosage looks like on a day off, not doing your first dose of a new batch of volumetrically dosed LSD on a day that you have to be at the office is probably worth doing. But again, until we have a sort of regulated marketplace, this is going to be a thing that we sort of have to deal with on our own as a community, which is really unfortunate because particularly as a microdosed substance, I don't see any reason that you couldn't sell LSD over the counter realistically. Maybe we'd want some age control on it, but for microdosing LSD, I really don't see any reason for that not to be broadly legal. in my opinion. Although I also feel that way about all drugs. So that's a much larger conversation. I am first and foremost a cognitive libertarian. I just believe that human beings have a right to control their own minds and bodies. And there's no comma on that sentence. That's the end of that sentence. We have the right to make those decisions for ourselves.
Agreed. We're in agreement there. Thank you so much, Brian. So many amazing comments here about how people love Dancesafe and the work you're doing, and
Thank you guys.
And how clear it is. So you guys go check out dancesafe.org and all those resources that we talked about. Mitchell, you're amazing. This prize winner, gets a book, Mystic Chemist, The Life of Albert Hofmann and His Discovery of LSD. We're super profesh here with this printout. The winner is, where's my winner? David Lopez. David Lopez, please email your shipping information for Albert Hofmann's Discovery of LSD book, Mystic Chemist. To win these giveaway, guys, be interactive, ask a ton of questions, and we will choose you at random. Okay, Mitchell, thank you so much. All righty.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I super appreciate it.
All right. Let's keep it moving. All right, our next guest, illustrator, musician, and self-described comic stripper, Brian Blomerth, has spent years combining classic underground art styles with his bitingly irreverent visual wit in zines, comics, and album covers. Here to talk about his amazing experimental children's book on acid, Brian Blomerth's Bicycle Day. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Jackie.
Oh, yeah. Oh, like I'm so in love with your visual stylings, man. They're so cool. Before I let you take it, I have to read this amazing quote from Albert Hofmann, written in an interview in High Times Magazine, March edition, 1976. A preliminary note from Albert Hofmann. I was at first not in agreement with the idea of publishing this interview here. I was surprised and shocked at the existence of such a magazine, whose text and advertising tended to treat the subject of illegal drugs with casual and non-responsible attitudes. Nevertheless, I came to the decision that my statements appearing in a magazine directed to readers who currently use illegal drugs might be of special value and could help to diminish the abuse or misuse of psychedelic drugs. I just love that so much. Please introduce us to your amazing book.
Well, thank you, Jackie, and holding a copy right here. And to go back to what Thomas Roberts was saying earlier, he really had no reverence for this day at all. There's a amazing story with Timothy Leary when he was on the run in Switzerland. He was hanging out with this band, Asherah Temple, putting LSD and 7-Up every day. Either way, he had a week where he hung out with, or a couple days where he hung out with Hofmann. And Leary was like, let me see the bicycle. And Hofmann, of course, was like, I threw that hunk of junk away. He definitely didn't take very much stock in it. I mean, even in his own book, LSD, My Problem Child, or Mein Söderngag, if you speak German, that's a horrible pronunciation. He talks about...
No, it was pretty good. Say it again.
I'm not going to get tricked into this.
All right, go for it.
Yeah, I don't know what I was saying.
Sorry, man. I threw you
No,
off.
it's okay. It's okay. I love getting thrown off. I love the chaos of the Zoom.
Right. That Hofmann is just was not super pleased with Bicycle Day.
Well, I mean, he was, obviously he named the book My Problem Child for a reason. He just didn't really put that much stock in the actual day. His stock was more on the compound, and the compound being researched and studied properly. And so, without further ado, let's go into this book. Sorry. This is where I should have been a little bit more prepared, but I will figure this out.
You're good, dude. You're good.
Okay. Another good quote to think about with Albert Hofmann is David E. Nichols said Swiss chemists don't make mistakes. Obviously, it doesn't apply to cartoonists. We
Right,
should be
that's
pulling
so
up right here.
that's so interesting. The implication of that is, well, to me, is that perhaps it wasn't a mistake, the dose that he took. Right?
There's 2 days and the story is pretty much stoner canon. But people always get it wrong when they're telling you, off to the side, blah, blah, blah. There's 2 days. There is mysterious, one day I like to call mysterious ingestion day, and the second day, which is the canonized bicycle day, April 16th and April 19th. And my book here deals with 3 days. It deals with first synthesis day and the 2 aforementioned days. And then, so are we in? Is this going? Let's go to view full screen. Jackie, we in?
Looks good, bud.
All right. Let's go. Great introduction by Dennis McKenna. A map of Switzerland. And this is the first synthesis day. November 16th, 1938. And there we have a little Yoda Leahy. Another one. I've never been to Switzerland, and I kind of based this beginning part on a Ricola commercial. That's kind of my generalized thoughts on this. This right here is rye, and you have the little Claviceps purpura growing on the stalks of rye. And they really do actually collect. I know you can't see my hand, but they really do collect those little wooden things. That's how they collect the little ergots.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because we haven't mentioned that yet. But I think ergot is a lesser known in its role in why we even have LSD.
Yeah, it's a predatory fungus. So Sandoz was unique as a chemical company because they had a organic chemistry department, and they were the first of these 3 dye companies in Switzerland, Geigy, and there's one more that's escaping me right now, Ciba, Geigy, and Sandoz were 3 dye companies, and Sandoz was the first to delve into pharmaceuticals. Later, Geigy was responsible for DDT. That was the big change up in the Swiss chemistry scene, which comes up later in the book. So there you go. They're collecting that, driving it in a truck to where? To Sandoz. And there we have our first appearance of Albert Hofmann, and there is his boss, Dr. Arthur Stoll. He's explaining the organic chemistry department. It's two substances he was working on at the same time, cardiactive glycosides.
Right. So he and his team were working to find, in layman's terms, chemical compounds that could be turned into pharmaceuticals to help blood circulation. Is that correct?
Yeah. For this one, there was thought that it would. Basically, yes. We'll just go with that. Yes. And here we have him talking about calcium. That was pretty much the main bread and butter here at the Sandoz Chemical Factory. It really was a small department too, only a couple of chemists. And then here we have, this is from Uncle Fester's Practical Guide to LSD Manufacturer, this method right here. And we have all of the scientific ingredients, as is known to me, a complete layman. Actually, we did send an early copy of the book to an actual chemist who was like, some of the chemistry is somewhat wrong, which for me, like, somewhat is a triumph. Like, that is so good, because it was so, I cannot stress enough how hard it is to accurately convey this in simple terms like this.
Right.
I have zero chemistry skills.
But it's beautiful you're doing. I mean, you did such an amazing job.
And, we try over here. We try. So he's thinking about that. First a snack, and then I'll feed you to the rats. And this is his actual lunch he had that day, which is incredible. And then his book, he included details such as that. But hey, that's the mind of a Swiss chemist.
What was the snack?
It was bread and butter and a glass of milk. And he really loves milk. Milk comes up multiple times throughout this tale.
It's very Swiss.
I mean, very. And he wouldn't have done this. They would have a separate department doing the rats, but just for continuity's sake, you got to include the rats. There you ride some. And Hofmann in his book really did speak of like a general love of nature multiple times. And so I wanted this section to kind of convey, a little bit of his day to day, because also these sections repeat later on, obviously. And there's Anita Hoffman. Get the mail.
So what did you discover about Anita Hoffman and her role in what has now become the legend of Albert Hofmann? And, was she into it? Was she supportive? Was she not?
Well, I did like the angle that this book was basically a panic attack where a significant other rescues you. That seemed pretty relatable to me. It might be to a lot of viewers. Yeah, I mean, Anita is extremely supportive, and they were together their whole lives. They met at a costume party, which is also an incredible detail. And I think that they had a really strong and stable relationship. And I really like Anita a lot. So there's the family. One of the book people did make these pancakes, and they said they were pretty good.
What was the pancakes? Is that a recipe?
Yeah, it's a Swiss pancake recipe. And there's the whole family as it stands right here. There's one more daughter that appears later in their lives, but obviously she wasn't part of this time frame, so she didn't get pictured in the book. But those are his sons and his daughter Gabby.
What was the moment, like the moment of inspiration where you thought, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this children's book on acid?
Well, I watched a documentary on YouTube about acid, and it starts with Albert Hofmann being like, the first acid trip was a terrible, horrible experience for me. And that obviously piqued my interest. So then I started doing research on it and realized that it kind of fits the perfect narrative arc of a children's book. And it's something that people often discuss, but never discuss with like the details appropriately, because it doesn't fit exactly right. There's a synthesis day, then 5 years you put it away, and then you come back, and then there's a mysterious ingestion day, which nobody knows how that happened or why. And then you have a purposeful injection, a purposeful ingestion.
Well, there have been injections too. I heard a story this morning of a former High Times editor, back in the 70s, injecting LSD intramuscularly, which of course he described as like one of the most impactful experiences of his life.
I mean, I believe that you could do that, yes, but in this case, it was just a little bit of water.
Right.
It seemed and that wasn't so uncommonplace at this time. I mean, obviously he knew the amount that it would take to have any effect on rats, so he was not expecting this tiny amount to have any effect at all. So we'll continue. And there's Paul Hemann Mueller. He's the chemist responsible for DDT. So there he is with the Geigy boys. And something else that people often don't think about is that this all took place during World War II. So it's definitely not a very chaotic time period for this to be taking place during. A mean joke.
What was the joke there?
I'm not going to repeat it.
Okay. Well, you can buy the book. You can buy the book to see it.
Yeah, that's the one part where it's not suitable for children. You got to have one, I couldn't get away with the whole thing without that.
Of course.
And there he is saying hello to this guard at Sandoz. Now, Susie, people often don't talk about either. And Susie isn't mentioned in My Problem Child. And I don't know why that is, but this was his female assistant, Susie, and she was actually the first woman to take LSD.
Oh, wow. Shout out to Susie.
Mm-hmm.
There's so few women. I mean, obviously it's immeasurable, but there's a lot of women who consume LSD. But there's so few women experts or researchers. The bill on today's show, of course, is all men, which is fine. But I really hope for the future that there more females and other diverse demographics step up, so we can have different positions on this super powerful substance.
Yeah, I mean, I loved for this book. I really enjoyed the amount that women played in the whole story. Like Susie was with him during the bicycle day. That's not canonized normally. People don't talk about that. And Anita obviously rescues him from his whole endeavor. So I mean, really, Susie and Anita are the real stars of the show, in my opinion.
Of course, as is typically the case. There's always
Yeah, I
great
mean,
women in the story.
Yeah, it's not so much about you in this instance, more about the people that help you out through this instance, you know? That's a good way to always look at it. There's some ergot derivatives that he possibly was working on. Now, this relates to he had a mystical experience in the woods as a child, and he talks about it, but never explains it. And this is my attempt to show that in a simple way. And I mean, that was a driving force behind his whole life and his reason to pursue chemistry, and with his love of nature too, you know. There he's doing a little thinking. Some of the ingredients. And this, you really would do this with this light separation. I can't remember exactly what that's called. And then this is taken directly from the patent. And you have a map of trituration over here on the left side, and some of the ingredients, all the temperatures you would need. I mean, obviously, I'm still a layman, so I tried.
How long did it take you to create this, Brian?
I think 4 months, to be honest. I had the time frame wrong, so I basically did the last 70 pages like in a spur, month and a half long panic attack, which I think put me in the right frame of mind to do this as well. So there we have that.
We have a couple questions. Do you mind?
Oh,
taking
absolutely.
a few?
Is that as far as we got?
Yeah. Well, you can keep going. You can keep clicking. But we
All right.
People want to know what music. I think music is so important in the psychedelic experience. So, what kind of music do you listen to, or did you listen to when creating this, if any?
With this, there was a week where I did Prefab Sprout, Steve McQueen. I did that on loop the whole time. So that was a little insane. I did a couple things like that. There's one YouTube playlist I did on loop for a whole week. I mean, when you're in the psychosis of having to work like 18 to 20 hours every day, it doesn't matter anymore. There's no time frame. You were just going. You're a machine.
Right. Wait, have you always drawn? When was the earliest memory you have of like knowing that it's something you were good at and wanted to do?
I mean, yeah, I've always loved to draw. Drawing is, I mean, I've done it my whole life. It's pretty weird because you're not, in a lot of ways, it's not meditative in the general way, but you're just really not in a normal space. Like you're just going for it. You're not really like thinking about anything or your day or anything else like that. You're just trying to get all these little shapes to make sense in a cognitive way. Here we have the first, this is all in the mysterious ingestion period. This is the first trip. And you might notice there's a little Canadian flag here. I really tried to get this notion of the trip happening internationally. In the later trip, all the creatures are Australian. For no good reason. Say, world champ turns.
Stunning. Oh, there's some mushrooms I see.
Yeah, a couple mushrooms. Yeah, there's a couple of psilocybin mushrooms that are popping around and hanging out and bearing witness in the corners. And there he is. He's drinking milk. Second instance of milk throughout this tale. And here we have the beginnings of Bicycle Day, April 19th, 1943.
Beautiful. All right. Well, where can people find out more about how to get this book and your amazing art? Where can people find you?
I guess the Anthology is the company that put out this book. And if you Google Anthology Brian Blomerth, it'll come right up. Should we stop the share? Should I keep clicking?
Oh, you can keep clicking, but we're gonna give away a signed copy of Brian Blomerth's Bicycle Day. Yay! And the winner is, drumroll please, Jill Ann Snyder. Congratulations,
Jill Ann Snyder. I'll write it right in here.
And then you're also Pups in Trouble on Instagram, where you show your beautiful, beautiful artwork.
That's correct.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. We can't wait to see what you produce next.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
Faux show. Okay. Moving on. And just a reminder, friends, we're doing giveaways. If you want giveaways, be active and comment on whatever medium you're visiting us from. Thank you so much for all your comments. All right. Our next guest, Dr. Matthew Cook, is a world-renowned regenerative medicine specialist and regular contributor to Delic Radio, which is the Delic podcast. He also has his own podcast. He also just happens to be one of my most favorite people. And in a series of telephone conversations lately, even on Delic Radio, he and I chronicle our respective experiences as friends, but also as doctor-patient and vice versa. Of course, during the heart of this COVID-19 epidemic, he specializes in regenerative medicine, which sometimes includes ketamine therapy. And he also just happens to be a foremost expert on the Grateful Dead. He talks about it in a beautiful way, and always kind of brings it back into what feels like my treatment plan. I didn't grow up listening to the Grateful Dead, but obviously they played a big role in the development of the popularity of LSD and LSD culture and psychedelic culture. You can find out more about his podcast at BioResetPodcast.com.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Perfect.
Amazing.
I'm closer to infinity.
What does that mean? What does closer to infinity mean?
You know, I just started asking people. I asked you yesterday. I said, on a scale from 0 to infinity, where are you? And I was talking to Matt Stang, and we were talking about where we were. And I said, well, I don't know, but I'm closer to infinity than 0.
Amazing. So we've talked a lot about COVID-19, and there's still a lot, of course, we're figuring out, and we will be. But I thought it would be prudent to have a section in the show about COVID-19, what your thoughts are, and give people perhaps some practical information that's up to date.
So on the practical front, there's definitely some things that seem to be helping. I've been talking to some people who definitely have positive cases who've been taking oral vitamin C. And we have a program, basically oral vitamin C in the range of 3 to 6 grams a day, and you can divide that out through the day. Vitamin D, 5 to 10,000 units a day. Low dose vitamin A, and quercetin. Quercetin is a flavonoid that seems to have some antiviral effects, and you can take 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a day. And those are some simple things that people can do. And then the most important thing you can do is try to continue to social distance while, in some sense, try to get your life back on track. Because I think we have to be prepared for the fact that this is going to continue longer than just the next month or so. And so we're awaiting better testing, and we're awaiting more information. And so there's some uncertainty, but there's a lot of new studies going on. We're going to be doing a couple studies in our office, and then supporting doctors around the country doing some trials. And so hopefully we'll learn a lot in the next month or two, and at the same time start to get our lives back on track.
Right. So you do a lot of IV therapy, and sometimes that can mean ketamine. Can you give us like a 101 on what your thoughts are on using ketamine as a therapy to treat depression and other mental disorders?
Yeah, ketamine, it's interesting, Jackie. It's an amazing drug. because it has an effect of turning some of the depression pathways off in the brain. There's a pathway called the NMDA pathway, and it turns that pathway off. It also turns on dopamine and serotonin, and very weakly the opioid class of receptors. And so and taken all together, it seems to cheer people up a little bit and give people hope. And what probably my favorite thing to do is to have therapeutic conversations. So it's like a form of therapy with ketamine, and it sort of blunts some of the triggers and emotional blocks that people have. And as I was telling you yesterday, people are somewhat suggestible and then become open to the possibility that maybe they're going to get better. And the nice thing is that it's a short defined thing. It only lasts for a couple hours. So it's something that people can do in bite-sized pieces.
Got it. What are your thoughts on LSD as a treatment for getting better or future treatment? So
I've heard sort of amazing stories, probably like all of us, about LSD being helpful. I think that like marijuana, LSD is very, very safe. However, it's more intense probably than some of the other psychedelics because if you don't get the dose right, I'm an anesthesiologist by training, and so everything is about dosage. And I think a lot of people accidentally end up taking really high doses of LSD, and so that led to some of the pictures in the book that we saw before this. I think that the ideal therapeutic range for LSD is going to be in the micro and mid dosing, particularly for the first few times, or 4 or 5 times. I think that there's an incredible potential for it to be helpful, and I'm just looking forward to a time when that becomes something that is available to people. And then, interestingly, if you think in terms of a framework of the different substances we're talking about, ketamine turns down the volume or the intensity. It's psycholytic and helps, it kind of melts some of the psychic structures that we sometimes hold to too rigidly. LSD is sort of a consciousness opener. MDMA is a heart opener that helps people get more empathy. And so then each one of these substances do slightly different things. And so then it depends on the guide, and it depends on the person. Does this person struggle more with lack of empathy, or more with an ability to see, or maybe some combination of that? And so then the traditional pharma play was the idea that there was one drug that I was going to give you, and then that drug would just magically, sort of a magical bullet that was gonna, like I'm throwing it through the computer screen, that would fix you. And
no, we talk about that a lot. We talk about with you as my doctor, my treatment, I've really come to terms with this idea that, like, I'm going to heal me ultimately. There is not one magical thing. And I hope with psychedelics, we don't get into this mindset that, like, this evangelical mindset that they're going to be the end all be all. They're super potent and have shown really high efficacy rates, but ultimately it's every single day, multiple treatments over and over again until you find your you, I guess.
Yeah, and so then it's kind of like this term became popular, like biohacking. And so it's almost like psycho-hacking or something, and
psychedelics are total biohack, totally.
And so then, and interestingly, I think what's going to happen is a more patient-centric model, I hope, will sort of evolve, where so patients, you get to take more control, and I think the more control you feel like you have, then that gives you a sense of, like, of presence, that you can navigate your life.
Yeah, we have a lot of comments here about advice on finding a ketamine therapist, and one question even on like why you choose ketamine therapy over others, which the answer is obvious because it's legal to do so. But where would somebody go if they want to find a reputable practitioner? What would your advice be?
So we're doing at BioReset Medical, we're doing a trial right now where we have a program where we mail people ketamine, and then you can take a ketamine lozenge. And then we either have an observer or a guide. An observer that can just kind of watch you and make sure that you're safe while you go through the journey, or a guide who actually can kind of talk and have a therapeutic conversation for you. We're also open at BioReset Medical, so we opened our office and we're seeing patients. If you look online, there are a lot of ketamine practices out there, and more coming. And so I'm quite optimistic about all of those, and the experiences are different, so it's probably worth trying. I think the ketamine is probably the safest and best place to start for all of this stuff, because it allows you to engage, but in a time limited fashion, and then in a legal fashion. I think the next place to start to go from there is maybe the MAPS community, because the people are trying to do some legal work on that front.
And Johns Hopkins, and there's we have a couple of people coming on in a few minutes to talk about their future studies as well. So let's we're on a roll here and we're keeping things moving. Again, you guys can go check out BioReset podcast, where Doc, as I affectionately call him, talks in length about the work he's doing up at BioReset Medical. Let's get into the Grateful Dead, because you have educated me, whereas I may have had a preconceived notion about the Grateful Dead and people that listen to them as being one thing, but obviously they're so important in the psychedelic conversation, and also their lyrics, right, can be extremely healing because they're telling stories, and ultimately that's what we are. We're human, we're creative, we tell stories, that's what we do. So where did you fall in love with the Grateful Dead, and how do you think we can tie that into this conversation?
So my parents were like Paul Simon and James Taylor fans. And so they were horrified when I found the Grateful Dead. I don't know. I found them at Ultimate Frisbee. A bunch of guys were listening to it. But you know, the storytelling and the conversation that the Dead were having, I think it hooked me when I was young. And I've always been kind of a storyteller and interested in the lyrics as much as anything. And so then I've always been super taken by them, and and the people who influenced them, Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan, is kind of a voice of Americana.
If somebody who's never experienced Grateful Dead, where would you send them first? What album? What song?
So we were talking about that song Ripple last night. So there's the song, and it opens up with the singer questioning himself, and he's singing about his voice and who he is. It's like, you think about us, we're out in the community, and he says his voice is a hand-me-down. The thoughts are broken. Perhaps they're better left unsung. But then he kind of says, well, let there be songs to fill the air. And so the song is called Ripple because it's a ripple in still water when there is no pebble tossed and no wind to blow. And so then that ripple represents the ripple of consciousness.
Oh, Kai says, this is pretty funny. I honestly believe that it's nearly impossible to have a bad trip or challenging trip whilst listening to Ripple, which I think is pretty amazing.
It's a good one. And what happened, you know, the Grateful Dead were playing music at the electric Kool-Aid acid test. So they were playing music while people were doing the initial LSD trips in San Francisco. And so they were playing, their music was playing to that. And so that the vibration, the ripple that they were riding was the same ripple that everyone else was riding. And so I think that then that becomes, that started this conversation that spread really to you. And you're just riding that same wave.
Amazing. Before we close out, what are your general thoughts for people who are experienced and maybe not experienced to using psychedelics to heal from the PTSD that is emerging because of this new COVID epidemic?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is if someone is going to do it, to have a safe guide that they can engage in, and that they can figure out how to do it in an appropriate dose range. But know that we get over things. I had this great conversation with this woman who's a friend of mine, and she said, "Oh, Matt, it's just like when the Berlin Wall came down," because she had been living in East Berlin. And she said, "We lost everything, but then we put it all together and we got back and we were stronger than ever." And so we just have to hold in our consciousness that we're gonna make it. We're gonna totally overcome this. We will, whenever trauma happens, it affects us and modulates us and forces, and it changes the direction of our journey. And the trauma is the thing that creates the hero. It can create a victim, but it can create a hero. And so then as you're engaging in psychedelics, set and setting is so important. And so in my mind, the idea is that the set and setting is focus that you're going to become a hero and that you're going to completely transcend and overcome.
Let's do that. You want to do that visualization real quick before we end, like the one we talked about on a podcast before about visualizing the end of this?
Oh, okay. So then imagine that, imagine a point in the future where your health is better than you could have possibly imagined. And so then just see that point. It's almost like a timeline and like and see the arc of your wandering path of your story, and then see a moment when your health is better than you ever thought possible. And then just imagine that you're feeling calm and peaceful, and see that you have achieved kind of another level of just relaxation and acceptance that you're enough, and then who you are is the perfect manifestation of who you were meant to be. And then see physically what that feels like in your body, and then see mentally and emotionally, and then energetically, and then spiritually. And then connect all of that together, and then start to see the path between now and that moment, and see that path get just brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. And then know that you're going to make it to that point no matter what happens, or something better. And the Grateful Dead have a line, they call it the golden road to unlimited devotion. And so see that you're going to transcend, and your life's going to be amazing.
Amazing. Oh, Doc, thank you so much. We love you over here at Delic. Remind people where they can find out about you and your staff's great work.
Oh, thanks so much. Go to BioReset Podcast. You can go to bioreset.com and BioReset Medical.
Thank you. All right, we're going to do a quick giveaway on my trusty paper here. Mo Turbin from YouTube, thank you for interacting and being so positive and amazing. You get a free book of Zigzag Zen. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Doc. You're amazing.
Thank you, Jackie.
All right, let's keep it moving, guys. We've got three more speakers, and then at the end, we're gonna integrate all this knowledge and get ready for your bicycle day afternoon with the visual sounds of visual reality. So our next guests, Michael and Donick are the creators of the up-and-coming Netflix movie called Have a Good Trip. Donick is an Emmy-winning writer, producer, and director for your favorite shows like Late Night with David Letterman and The Simpsons. Mike Rosenstein is an award-winning TV and film producer that got his start working with Ben Stiller for nearly a decade. These guys are super prolific and doing amazing stuff. Their new show is coming out in May on Netflix called Good Trip Netflix. All right.
Oh, hey, Donick.
Hi, Mike. Are you reading something?
Oh, yeah, I was reading this actually great book that I got right here.
We have to do this live chat right now, Mike. You got to put the book away.
Okay. What's up? What's up, Jackie?
What's up, Mike? What's up, guys? Oh my gosh, thanks so much for being here and for spreading the good word about psychedelics and celebrity psychedelic experiences. I think that's super important because as these people who we, trust or value the opinions of, as they come out of the psychedelic closet, it becomes easier for other people to have the conversation and it destigmatizes the whole thing. So tell us what is happening. You just released the movie's poster at High Times, and tell us what you learned and what the show is.
Yeah, so this is, we're really excited. This is the first day we're allowed to share anything, and we just shared the poster today. It's a feature-length documentary that will be on Netflix May 11th. It's called Have a Good Trip, Adventures in Psychedelics. And really what this is we went out, we thought it would be just fun to get stories and hear people's stories, experimenting with psychedelics. And what we found was there's a much bigger conversation. This has taken 11 years crazily to make. So the conversation just in pop culture about psychedelics has changed a lot, and it's become a lot more, like you said, getting people out of the closet and actually talking about it. We thought we were onto something really sort of secret that like, everybody does something and has a story. But then we've gotten into a lot more as we talk to people. We talk to 50 plus celebrities, everyone from Ad Rock and Sarah Silverman to Deepak Chopra and Sting and just Ben Stiller, everybody we could get to sit down and talk to us. We started to find out there was a lot of different experiences and a lot of life-changing, some very funny, some very moving, and a wide range of stuff. So, and we thought we had this tool of animation to bring what you normally can only see in your brain to life. So it's an interesting mix.
Yeah, it's hard to like describe and visualize trips, and people try to talk about them. And we figured this was like a fun way to kind of get people who like to hear these stories and also people who don't know about psychedelics to kind of bring them in through these people, through these speakers and through comedy, which, is kind of what we do. So, and Donick's a legend. He's got his Mr. Sparkle posters behind him. He wrote that episode of The Simpsons.
There's some Mr. Sparkle back there.
Donick is a huge legend. Yeah, and that clip that you saw, actually, that Bicycle Day clip is narrated by Nick Offerman, who plays our scientist in the movie. And it's actually something that is on the cutting room floor, believe it or not. So we just shared it with you guys today for this special occasion. As an exclusive, yes.
Very exclusive.
It's so jam-packed with cool stuff and cool people that that didn't make the cut, because we figured that, is a story that people have heard before, and it's so great. And so, yeah, it's happy that we showed it here.
Yeah, and so we hit on a couple things as the theme for this movie. As we were talking to people, it initially started as, let's just hear stories and see where that leads us. And what we kind of stumbled into and realized about halfway through making this is that, I grew up in the 80s and in a very just say no drug culture, where Grateful Dead shows were kind of these sort of safe havens where the 60s lived, but elsewhere in culture it was just say no and drug wars and something you don't even, taboo, something you don't talk about. And we kind of hit on this thing that, like, after Leary and the end of the 60s, that these drugs, psychedelics, were vilified, and sort of there was this just say no scare campaign where we couldn't even talk about it. And as we talk to celebrities who, all of the trips we talk about happened in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, during that sort of middle phase, that people were still using these, people are still experimenting these. there's just not a rational conversation being had. And instead there were a lot of scare films and after school specials were coming out. And really the impression that people would get in my high school were, if you take any drugs, you're gonna jump out a window. And it was sort of like, okay, let's stop for a minute and actually tell real stories from real people, and both good and bad. Some people have bad experiences, but why did they have bad experiences? Let's dig into that. Why did they have good experiences? What are the set and setting? What are all the rules, you know? So in a weird way, I think we've made something that's really practical advice. These are real stories from real people that you can take what you need for yourself and run with it. But you know, don't go crazy, right, Mike?
Don't go crazy. There's a great comment right now that says, "What a concept! The truth." That is exactly right. That is exactly
Novel.
what we're doing. It's just we're telling truthful stories that are entertaining to listen to, but also this bigger story of psychedelics, and that we've sort of been told this big lie, as we all know, and then, you know, we're having fun with it. Yeah. So we talk about after school specials. We do a parody of an after school special with Adam Scott. And it's all very fun.
So as filmmakers, how have psychedelics influenced you? I mean, the answer seems obvious, but maybe not. We want to hear your personal stories about how they've driven you to create certain projects, and this one in particular.
I mean, for me, you know, psychedelic thinking has always been, in the most basic way, sorry if these are cliches, but like out of the box thinking. And the best storytelling is when you can get into a bunch of different points of view and see a story from a bunch of different angles, and then figure out what's the best way to tell it, what's the most interesting way to tell it. So even, you know, the best Simpsons episodes are ones that you dig in and kind of flip over and spin around and look at from different angles and go like, yeah, this one's better told from inside someone's brain or on the moon or, you know, in a shopping mall. It doesn't, I think psychedelics have always been a way of thinking out of the box, which making stuff is usually most interesting when you do that.
Yeah. And part of what Donick was saying too about, you know, talking about the what you should do and shouldn't do, you know, we, again, through a sort of funny runner through the movie, we do teach the lessons of set and setting and, you know, safety protocols. Don't drive on acid. We do things like that through comedy. And so, you know, there's a bigger lesson that we're kind of learning through the movie, and also, you know, looking towards the future with all the research that everyone is doing, some of the great people we have on today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about drunk history, and then I think about the last 6 or 7 years of producers trying to document somebody being high on cannabis, for example, or tell the cannabis story, or like send that through the screen, so to speak, from the person who's high. And I haven't seen it work super successfully, right? And I just wonder what it would be like to do that concept with psychedelics, because I imagine the people that you're interviewing, they're sober, telling their stories after the fact, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll tell the quick drunk history story just quickly, because Mike and I laugh about it. But we started this 11 years ago. And when drunk history came out, I was like, oh no, they're doing what we're doing. And then I realized they're not really doing what we're doing. They're kind of they're getting drunk and talking about history. We're actually talking to sober people who are reflecting on experiences they had in their own brains. So it's a very different thing, really. And I think it's impossible to bring to life the true lessons you get from a psychedelic experience by just showing dragons or whatever you saw. I think we can bring to life with animation and feel some of those feelings and some of those moods, and give people a little bit of a peek of some of those things. But it's really letting storytellers share what they've learned that gives you more and more of that. It's almost impossible, though, when you talk about the bigger things like, oh, right, we're all connected, or love is all we need. Like the big realizations you have sound like cliches when you just say them, but you have to feel them, you know? And it's hard to show a feeling in a cartoon.
Yes. Yes. And let me talk about some of the people we have in the movie, which I'm realizing we didn't really do. But I mentioned Nick Offerman and Adam Scott. We also have Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys, and A$AP Rocky, and Ben Stiller, who Donick mentioned, and Donovan.
Great story from Bill Kreutzmann. We dug deep into the Grateful Dead a little bit. A lot of the people we talked to had experiences either at Dead shows or trying to avoid a dead show or getting locked out of a dead show. I mean, of course, that was a place where psychedelics live, but we got a chance to talk to Bill Kreutzmann about how psychedelics, what they meant to him, and he shares some funny stories and tips.
Yeah, and we have Reggie Watts, Sarah Silverman, Shepard Fairey, Sting, who's amazing and has great things to say about psychedelics and his experiences and what he's sort of learned from and was able to integrate into his everyday life. So yeah, we love
ASAP Rocky, Nick Kroll.
Nick
Rosie
Kroll
Perez tells an amazing story. Sarah Silverman. Who else?
Yeah,
Will
Forte. Carrie Fisher, who we interviewed, like 6 or 7 years ago. We've been doing this for a long time. So
Carrie Fisher was a really interesting interview because she talks about mental health, and addiction, and these are the two of the big positive places where psychedelics can have real impact going forward in our human plane that we all live on now. She was a great example. She invited us into her house. She showed us around. I think she spent years and years seeing the world through a psychedelic lens and feeling normal on acid. Is the story she shares, is that it kind of helped her cut out bipolar and addiction issues and actually get down to some real truths.
Cool. Someone, Lessa Miller says, if there's a book associated with this segment, there's not a book, my friend, but there is a movie coming out May 11th, right, guys?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, look, if enough people watch the movie and every one of you tells every single person you've ever met to watch this movie, then yeah, we'll come out with a coffee table book version of it. We have, so many stories, and in the making of this movie too, you kind of like everyone starts to tell you their stories, and there's just like these endless great stories. So yeah, we jam-packed this movie full of the best stuff. But yeah, sure, a book, you're on the pre-sell list.
We really wanted this to feel like, what this came out of was initially a lunch I was having with some friends, and we were just all sharing stories and experiences, like I'm sure many of you have done. And some of it's funny and some of it's real, and some of the things you saw change your life or didn't change your life, or mistakes you made. And this felt like a really interesting way to do that. So the hope is that this movie feels like, oh, you're pulling up a chair with 50 of people that you know, and some of them you love, and sharing stories.
How long did it take you guys to put this together?
That lunch I had was 11 years ago. And then it's this weird thing where you're like, hey, Sting is available next February in New York at this time. You're like, okay, I guess we'll shoot Sting then. And then, whoever, Natasha Lyonne can meet you in 3 months. And, we sort of had to collect the stories at the pace that we could get them. And then at a certain point, we felt like, wow, we got a lot of great stuff here. Let's figure out how to animate it, bring these to life. Some of the reenactments are live action, like the Adam Devine and that Workaholics guys did one of the reenactments for us. So some of them are live action. Those took a little bit of time. And then there was just a long phase of editing and making this thing flow.
And actually it's, the psychedelic conversation has changed so much now, and it's becoming mainstream. And now, we want to be a part of that conversation. It was different 6 months, a year ago. And so, it's actually great timing, we feel, for people to, watch this movie with open ears.
Yeah, I would imagine just a few years ago, it was probably difficult to get certain name celebrities relaxed enough to even talk about their experience on camera.
Yeah, I would say we had probably somewhere between 5 and 10 no's for every one person who said, sure, I'll talk about it. And people are cautious, even people who it was life-changing for, I do think some of that is a lot of us are raising kids. I had sort of an interesting experience as I and both of my kids are actually in this movie. They turn up in reenactments from 5 years ago. So they're littler versions of themselves. It's actually very trippy. But they, my daughter's now 17. And so part of making this movie was like, well, what do I want to share with, responsibly share with my kids about what this experience is and how you use it. And let's not be cavalier about it. Let's have a real conversation about what's good and how you can make mistakes, and don't make those mistakes. There's no reason to.
Civil discourse, absolutely. Well, I'm so impressed with the lineup that you guys got and the production value. Please, please, please keep it moving, keep pushing art out there like this to help us destigmatize the psychedelic conversation. Again, people can watch Have a Good Trip on Netflix May 11th. And you guys just released the beautiful movie poster art at High Times. I believe it's on High Times social media, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's on High Times social media, and follow along. We're at Good Trip Netflix on everything, and we'll keep posting stuff, and we'll keep telling you about extra clips and art, and tell your friends.
Mike and Donick, thank you. We're super honored to have you on today.
Thank you. We're honored to be a part of this. Yes, have a good trip. Donick, I didn't know you were going to wear the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, we wore the same sweatshirts.
Yeah.
We've been loving the conversation all day. Keep it up.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stick around.
Alrighty, we're gonna do another giveaway. We have 2 more speakers after this, and then we're getting into some visual sound vibes, guys. Thanks for participating. As a community is so important to this conversation. You guys are the muscle. You guys are what makes it happen. Thank you to Roger Harold. Roger, you get this amazing custom one-of-a-kind Delic hat. Yes, yes, yes. Created by our friends over at Seedless. Please send us your shipping information to info@Meet Delic. You guys keep commenting. We also, coming up, have a custom jacket giveaway with our Hey You Monkey. The Meet Delic's Hey You Monkey was inspired by an artist up in Canada who is amazing, and it's got custom patches on here. Some from Rahn English, who is an amazing street artist from New York. And so we'll give away this next. Thank you guys. Of course, don't forget to donate. You can donate to Decrim California on Venmo. That's meet_delic on Venmo. Or you can go to decrimca.org.
I thought it was funny.
All right. Let's keep it moving. All right, we have another friend of ours. Let me make sure. Yep. Dr. Dave Rabin. He is an MD, PhD, the Chief Innovation Officer, co-founder, and co-inventor at Apollo Neuroscience, Inc. He is a board-certified psychiatrist, translational neuroscientist, inventor, and has been studying the impact of chronic stress in humans for more than 10 years. Dave, how goes it?
Great, Jackie. How are you?
Hi, friend.
It's so great to see you. This is such a great production you have going.
Thanks. Hey, we're trying here. We do our best. So you are prolific in your science, in your in your academics, and all the things that you do. I know you have some new stuff coming up. You've worked with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, ketamine. Your amazing device Apollo has the science of touch behind it. So, and then I think we talked about serotonin, right? Serotonin and the impact that some psychedelics have on serotonin in your body is a message that is super important to get out to people so that they understand what's going on in their system when they're consuming certain psychedelics. So you take us away. Where would you like to start?
Well, thanks for that intro. I really appreciate it. And
you're welcome.
You look fabulous, by the way.
Thank you.
Is really giving you props for the whole thing. It's amazing.
Thanks,
amazing. And you're the best for hosting this. And I think I actually put together a little presentation about serotonin and psychedelics because I think that this is often something that's not commonly explained to people. And I'm just going to share my screen real quick.
Awesome.
And let me see if you guys can see that.
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you guys through a brief clinical history of psychedelic medicine. And, this starts with plants because plants have been used safely in ceremonies for coming of age and community building and healing and trauma and chronic illness and treating chronic illnesses for thousands and thousands of years. And I think we often forget and overlook these things because they have been right in front of us for so long. And I think it's so important to always, as much as we appreciate LSD came from nature. It came from, the distillation of, a fungal, organism and toxins and the things that nature produces. And then we turned that into something that was safe and incredibly transformative as a healing medicine. It works just like, the reason I think it's so amazing is because at very, very small doses, LSD safely works very similarly to the way that ayahuasca and psilocybin and these other plant medicines work. And so what's really interesting, I think, about, and what people also forget, particularly on the Western medicine side, is how much of a role the discovery of MDMA and LSD played in the way that medicine works in the world these days. And synthetic psychedelic medicines like MDMA and psilocybin, MDMA and LSD, when they were discovered, Albert Hofmann discovered LSD. What was understood to be that he was trying to find a treatment for other physical health conditions. And a lot of people were at that time looking for and studying things like LSD to figure out how to treat things like chronic migraines and chronic hiccups that won't go away, which was actually something that affected a decent number of people. And then of course, anxiety, addiction, and trauma. And so ultimately Albert Hofmann discovered LSD in search of treatment and ultimately found something that was incredibly transformative in so many other ways. And it's used, it has been studied actually more probably than almost any other psychedelic that is out there, which is also really interesting. And so I think one thing that we also forget is that LSD and the discovery of LSD and its impact on the serotonin system was actually one of the most critical findings in what resulted in the development of all of the drugs that we use in mental health today. As a psychiatrist, we prescribe SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that flood the serotonin receptors, all of them in our whole brain, and attempt to rebalance or create a improved environment for serotonin stimulation of the serotonin receptors like 5-HT2A, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so what's really important for us to remember, I think, from a Western medicine perspective, is that LSD was critical, and the science and the work was done around LSD at places like Harvard and Hopkins in the past, long before. These programs were incredible because this research led to the discovery of all of these medicines that have helped so many people. But we need to remember also that LSD itself is an incredible medicine that, when approached properly, can be incredibly healing. And I think many psychedelic medicines have shown greater promise to safely treat treatment-resistant mental illnesses, which are mental illnesses that are found to be resistant to treatment in Western medicine. This is described as resistant to treatment in over 2 or more full trials of medicine or therapy. And when you've done 2 or more full trials of therapy or medicine, according to the doctor's guidelines, then you are considered to be treatment resistant. And this is a terrible thing to tell people. But what's interesting is that Western medicine has a way of describing its own failure in some ways to actually use the strategies that we understand, or we think we understand, to treat very complicated, very, very complicated chronic illnesses. But Eastern medicine and plant medicine have been powerful tools to treat these treatment-resistant or more complicated illnesses for thousands of years. And so if we remember to go back and look at our history, and there's an incredible film that just came out for everybody. I think it's on Vimeo, and it's Paul Stamets' Fantastic Fungi.
Yeah, shout out to Louis Schwartzberger. Schwartzberg created that with Paul, and he's a brilliant filmmaker who's responsible for like the technology that we all know from Planet Earth and the Discovery Channel and stop motion. Fantastic Fungi is also a great film, yeah.
So, and I think it's important to mention that, along the way, when all of this work was being done, that our lack of focus on education and our lack of helping people understand how to use these medicines safely, like what Delic is doing to bring education to the world, what Dancesafe is doing, and a lot of these other organizations, MAPS. It's critical for us as a community to support these organizations, because these organizations will help to secure the safety of these medicines for all of us. And we know what happens when we don't use these medicines safely. They result in banning and censorship. And that is not something that we can afford as a world right now. So it taught us, I think, from the misuse, there is always, a positive side, which is that it taught us that setting and intention are critical factors governing the outcomes of use of these medicines. And so it's always important, the most important, to use these medicines like LSD, like psilocybin, MDMA, even cannabis, in a safe, emotionally, mentally, physically, and ideally financially and legal setting. Because any lack of safety can result in an experience that is more traumatizing in some capacities than healing. And these medicines are so powerful, they can lead into traumatizing experiences that are meaningful in a negative way, but can result in powerful growth if we're ready to experience that. And they can also lead to powerfully transformative, positive healing experiences that are all love and gratitude and forgiveness and compassion and all of these incredible things. But we need to remember, how to use these medicines the way they were intended. And so I think going back to all the incredible work that's being done, and LSD falls into the category of all of these things that are shown in the studies of psilocybin and MDMA, reduced symptoms of depression. Greater than 60% of patients with MDMA no longer met diagnostic criteria in the MAPS phase 2 trial after 5 years. That is incredible, because these people coming into the trial had treatment-resistant PTSD for over 17 years. And so these people have not had responses to anything, and they take 3 doses of MDMA and 12 weeks of psychotherapy, and over 60% of them are symptom-free at 5 years out, or almost symptom-free. And that's transformative in terms of psychiatry. It's the closest thing we've ever had to a cure for mental illness. And so it's incredibly important for all of us as a community to get behind this research and the safe use of these things, so that we can make sure, and the education of our communities, so that we can make sure that these treatments can be available for us or for our families and friends when we need them. And these, improved feelings of connection and safety to others, it's just showing how similar plant medicine and synthetic medicine really are in the way things that they provide in healing for people, improved sense of safety. And they're both rated, I think, as critically important from all of this. All of these experiences are rated as one of the most meaningful experiences that we have in our lives. That is one of the most common reports from all psychedelic studies. And what's so interesting about that is when you look at the research, and this is just 3 of my favorite of a whole host of literature that you can find. Most of these papers are available online for free, because a lot of the psychedelic scientists are into open access journal publication, which is really important for the transparency in science in the community. And I think that when you read papers like this, what you find is that serotonin 5-HT2A receptors keep popping up as this site that has recently been found in 2016, 2017, where serotonin and psilocybin and LSD bind when they go into the brain. And what's so interesting about that is this study on the left showed by Franz Vollenweider's group in Switzerland that psilocybin and LSD both bind to the 5-HT2A receptor and create a response in that receptor that induces what we call potentiation, which is that when the receptor binds serotonin, it binds it and holds on to it for a longer period of time, which creates more activity over a longer period of time in bursts of activity. And that burst of activity is critical to the building of what we describe as meaning from our lives, from our reality, from anything that we perceive. Meaning being what results in our making memories that stick longer, right? Like when we think about why do we remember certain things over other things, it's really just because certain things seem more meaningful to us than other things, and that's why we pay more attention to them. We devote more resources of storage in our brains to things that we perceive more meaningful. And that's exactly the same for trauma as it is for positive, meaningful experiences with our loved ones and our friends and family, and with psychedelics and whatever it may be. So what Franz Wohlenweider showed is that when they gave people in a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial, they gave people LSD and psilocybin and a drug called ketanserin, which is a blocker that you can take by mouth that blocks selectively the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor in the brain. And when you block that receptor in the brain with that drug, and people don't know whether they're taking that drug or a sugar pill, so they don't know whether they're getting the blocker or not, all the people who got the ketanserin reported that there was no change in their sensory experience. They received no alteration of consciousness from the LSD experience. Their survey reports of their experience, which were pretty extensive, and their way that they perceived music, which is one of the first things that changes when you start to feel the onset of an altered state, because music is so powerful in terms of the way that it affects our brains, and so much our brains are devoted to the emotionality and the interpretation of music and vibrations in general. That's what we are. We're like vibration perceiving organisms. And so with these vibrations, when they come at us at a certain frequency that we devote a certain attention level, present and mindfulness to them, it seems like we're increasing 5-HT2A serotonin activity, and that is creating or responsible for, at least at the very top, a lot of other receptors are involved too, down below. But what Franz Wohlenweider showed is that it's 5-HT2A receptors at the top of the cascade of everything else that happens as a result of psychedelic activity. I
don't want to cut you off, but
no worries.
Can we break it down real quick for students like me, and serotonin and how MDMA affects serotonin versus how LSD and psilocybin? Because my understanding is that LSD and psilocybin, it's a very similar interaction, but MDMA, on the other hand, in layman's terms, I always say it's dumping your stores of serotonin, and that's something that's very important and should be considered and a part of the conversation when talking to people who are new to this, because when you're mucking with your serotonin storage, and you maybe have a pre-existing imbalance or whatever, that's like a really important safety data point to talk about.
Right. So I think yes. So there's things. The thing they have in common is that all of these psychedelics appear to induce their primary way that they induce their psychedelic meaning-changing experience is through a burst activation at the 5-HT2A receptor, which means that there's a burst of serotonin that comes out of neuron 1 to neuron 2. Neuron 2 has the receptors, neuron 1 has the serotonin, and it bursts serotonin into the receptors, and they get super saturated and then activated. And MDMA itself is also, I think, shown to bind the 5-HT2A receptor as well itself to activate it. So that's a double whammy with MDMA. And that's selectively to the emotional cortex, which is also really interesting. MDMA is a fascinating selective molecule to the emotional cortex and these 5-HT2A serotonin receptors. And so it's like the reason that is different from LSD and psilocybin is that LSD and psilocybin both bind to the 5-HT2A receptor, and psilocybin binds in the active site like MDMA. It doesn't increase burst activity in the same way from the presynaptic neuron, but it does bind to the receptor and activate it over a long period of time. LSD binds to the side of the receptor, and it increases the receptor's ability to clamp onto serotonin, and then it holds serotonin for, I don't know, the half-life of LSD being like 8 hours or something like that, or 12 hours. So it holds serotonin for days longer than it did before with LSD, which I think is largely responsible for the effective mood boosting experience with microdosing that a lot of people report, which is really interesting. And I think that's also, and there's so much more we can get into on this. And so I'm just gonna make sure that I don't go over, but I think one of the most important lessons we can learn from this comes from Eric Kandel's work, who won the Nobel Prize in 2002 for discovering the mechanisms of learning and memory, and showing that, along with a whole host of other colleagues, that the way that our brains remember and learn things in terms of meaning come from the meaning of positive and negative things, safe things, and fearful, threatening things. And there's a balance between safety and threat that we record in our neurons, in the way that our neural networks talk to each other. And eventually that becomes what we call the default mode network. And that network stores the safety and the fearful experiences that creates the sense of self that we call our ego or our identity. And so psychedelics, going back to these publications on the right, psychedelics were shown by Robin Carhart Harris and a number of other folks to actually disrupt default mode network activity, which really is in a dose-dependent way. The more you take, the more dissolution of ego you have, the less sense of identity self, me self, and the more sense of we self you have. And this is something that's one of the most reportedly common experiences. I think what's so interesting about what Eric Kandel showed and why he won the Nobel Prize is because when you look at the way that ancient 300 million year old sea snails learn to remember fearful and safe things and they find meaningful, it's the same way that we learn to remember fearful and safe things that we find meaningful. And it's like the neurotransmitters are slightly different. Like dopamine works like serotonin, and serotonin works like dopamine for them compared to us. But the way the neurons actually function is the same exact way that our neurons function. And so what that means is our way of thinking is hundreds of million years old, and it is trainable, and that we can practice training ourselves to experience safety and powerful healing experiences just by practicing. Practicing gratitude helps us become better at experiencing gratitude and healing. Practicing meditations that disrupt the default mode network, like any number of meditation techniques and deep breathing techniques like holotropic breath work as an example, will do this, and it disrupts the default mode network just with breath. And just like a psychedelic experience, you can go from feeling like you're skiing down a same track over and over and over again every single day and bored out of your mind, to feeling like 8 feet of powder just dropped on you and you don't know where to go, because you can go anywhere and the whole world is open to you in terms of your choices. There's no preconceived notions or biases anymore when you've disrupted the sense of identity, which is basically like saying that for 8 hours or 6 hours, in the case of ketamine, 2 hours, we're gonna let down the walls that we've created that box ourselves into the sense of who we believe we are, and just say that maybe it's possible we don't yet know what we're truly capable of. We don't yet know what our full potential is. And we really see it when we're out here on the open slopes, or when we're out there on the open slopes of the mind with psychedelics. And I think, do I have a few more minutes?
Yeah, we got a couple.
So I think what really, just summarizing some of the stuff, what makes these experiences really critical is safety, presentness or mindfulness, and the intention to heal. Intentionality being the guiding pathway, the guiding force of our own consciousness that we bring into every experience, whether that's a daily moment-to-moment experience or a psychedelic experience. And this guides the outcome of those experiences. And when we create these experiences, we create new pathways for meaning making in our brains and bodies, and we reconsolidate past experiences to understand ourselves more completely. And this is really required to optimize our full potential. And the things that we've learned from LSD and psychedelic research over the years that I think are really important, if anyone's going to take anything from this, is that the mind and the body are intricately and irrevocably interconnected. Psychedelic or altered state experiences are normal and states of perception where new meaning making is possible, and these could be achieved with or without medicine. These states are facilitated by safety, presentness, and intention, and these experiences can be perceived as positive, negative, or both, and then can be accessed with or without medicines. And I think that part is really critical. Meditation practice, whether it's movement meditation like yoga, or whether it's sitting meditation, or whether it's any kind of meditation, there's infinite kinds. It's up to us in a lot of ways to customize and find our meditation for ourselves. I think people forget that meditation is a very personal thing, and it's our relationship with the environment, with the oneness, getting in touch with nature and ourselves that is unique, and that we also have to be compassionate with ourselves to find our own path in meditation and practice, and that we can access these states without medicine. And the medicine is trying to teach us that we can do this. And if we use the medicine to try to teach us that we can access these states without the medicine, then we no longer become dependent on psychedelics for these states. They become these incredible tools that we can use once in a while to really make dramatic consciousness expanding transformative change. But what we rely on then is self. We learn to be self-reliant healers. And as MAPS and all of the, Michael and Andy Mithofer and Stan Groff have said for years, these medicines are allowing us to activate our own inner healing intelligence. And this allows us to really foster a healing experience for ourselves at any moment in any time without medicine. And so the meaning of these experiences is not encoded in our neurons, but it's also encoded in our DNA, in our epigenetic regulation. And this regulates the expression of stress and reward response genes. And as we develop over time, we change the expression of our DNA, and not the DNA itself, but the expression of it. And this helps to encode things that actually are long lasting. And this is the pathway of memory formation that in large part Eric Kandel discovered and Rachel Yehuda have worked on. And it's just incredible work. So check out these people. And thank you so much, Jackie, for letting me share this with all of you.
Oh, thank you so much. There's a lot to get through, right? That's the point of Delic, was to help filter and synthesize a lot of this really dense information, because of course psychedelics as a whole, we're talking about several substances that are all individual and unique. And so thank you so much for helping us shed light on the practicality of these things and how they interact with our body, and also the point that ultimately we have everything we need to be well and to be happy, and that psychedelics are powerful tools, but ultimately it comes back to us. So let's do a quick question before we let you go. I'm sorry, I don't have the name of this person, but they asked, how do antidepressants interact with psychedelics?
Oh, that's a great question. Antidepressants, it depends on the psychedelic, obviously. Typically, what antidepressants do is they flood the serotonin receptors that we were talking about earlier. They flood them with serotonin so that they're stimulated all the time. And what happens, like any receptor in the brain or the body that's stimulated all the time, is that it pulls back and reduces the amount of receptors that are on the surface, because it doesn't want to be overactivated, because that's overstimulating to the neurons on the other side. And so the whole brain adapts to being in what's really like a hyper serotonergic state that changes our baseline. And so what's really interesting is that the most common side effects of SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are the most common antidepressant, anti-anxiety medicines, is that they they cause numbness, feelings of disconnection, feeling like anorgasmia, not being able to have an orgasm. That's one of the most common complaints that people have, which, why would you want that if you're already depressed? That's like a really unfortunate side effect that we oftentimes don't explain to people enough. And so the reason that's important is because what that shows us is when we flood the serotonin system, that does not cause the goal effect. It numbs the bottoms, the negatives, but it also numbs the tops. And so we don't want to numb the bottoms and the tops. We want to just help people overcome the negatives and grow through them. And so what happens is that numbing effect extends into the use of psychedelics for most people, which is that they have to take a higher dose of a psychedelic medicine to get an effect when they're on a serotonin flooding agent, because psychedelics work and meaningful experiences happen, as I was talking about earlier from Franz's work, that by burst activation at the 5-HT2A receptor. When the serotonin receptor is flooded, it's overstimulated, the sensitivity is down, and it's not going to be sensitive to burst activation as much. So people tend to take more psychedelic medicine, which causes extra serotonin in their whole body, which ultimately results in, or could result in, what we call serotonin syndrome, or a very severe complication that could result in death. And so it's very important for people who are on antidepressants or psychiatric medicine of any kind to consult a medical professional, preferably a psychiatrist, before they use any psychedelic medicine. And what we really recommend for our patients personally is that we taper people off of most of their psychiatric medicine before they do a psychedelic experience.
Copy. Wise advice from a wise person. Dave, thank you so much. Remind people where they can find out more about your work and your technology and all that fun stuff.
You can find more about my work at drdave.io or theboardofmedicine.org, which is a nonprofit that helps supports the safety of psychedelic research and plant medicine for the community, basically medicines that don't cause harm or have a low risk of harm when used safely. As the Hippocratic Oath is really focused on do no harm. And this is the guiding principle of medicine that we should remember always. And that will allow us, I think, to bridge the gap to bring psychedelics and a lot of Eastern techniques into Western medicine as a first-line treatments. And then you can find out about Apollo, which is a wearable that helps induce altered states of healing and helps facilitate the body's balance in the nervous system and boost recovery. And you at apolloneuro.com, APOLLONEURO.com. Thanks.
Thank you, my friend. You rock. All right, we are giving away this amazing custom Delic jacket. This amazing Hey You Monkey is from an artist named Barry Lorne from Canada. He is just a gem, and I just came across it one day on the internet, and I thought, you know what, that is the mascot for Meet Delic. I need to have that. So we love you, Barry. Thank you so much. And the winner of this custom jacket, which we will have more of on thedelic.com next week, the winner is Lauren Sasser. Yeah, girl, get it. Please send us your shipping information to info@meetdelic.com. And you're amazing. You're all amazing. Thank you. All right, let's move it on. We've got a quick check-in about some LSD research. We have some story time, a quick check-in with Decrim California, and then we're getting into some grooves, some visual sounds of visual reality. All righty. The next guest is the co-founder, director, and co-CEO, oh, very Silicon Valley, of MindMed. They discover, develop, and deploy psilocybin and psilocin scientifically. No. Oh, let me start that over. Sorry, JR. He's the co-founder and director and co-CEO of MindMed. They discover, deploy, and develop psychedelic-inspired medicines to alleviate suffering and improve health. And I'm so excited to have you on because of the recent developments that MindMed acquired LSD research straight from Basel. And so I want you to tell us what that is and how you guys are going to use that to help people.
Sure. So a lot of work has happened since the 1930s in, I would say, the last about 10 to 15 years in Switzerland. And there's really a Swiss legacy that a lot of folks don't always know about. I think a lot of people that are on this right now probably do. But we acquired about 8 clinical trials from the University Hospital Basel. And we are going to be using a lot of that data to make better versions and safer versions of LSD psychotherapy. So that is the objective of MindMed. We are going entirely through the FDA pathway and developing these medicines through clinical trials.
Copy. So what is that like going through the FDA?
Well, it's a good question. I think there's, things operate a little bit differently inside the Beltway versus outside the Beltway. And those are, things that you have to keep in mind when working on these clinical trials and medicines. The one thing that I have learned from my co-founder, Stephen Hurst, who's been in drug development for 40 plus years and was an advisor to a lot of the folks that are working at the Hefter Institute, and really on how you do a commercial drug trial for a psychedelic. He was helping a lot with that. What's very great about the FDA process is I think a lot of the politics and stigmas are removed. What they are looking for is for us to prove the safety and efficacy of these substances. And I think that's a great opportunity because there's a lot of compelling data out there, but it's now our job and others in the space and industry to prove these substances are safe and they have efficacy for certain indications.
Totally. So what What are you guys doing compared to Compass and the other people going that same FDA route? What gaps are you filling that other people aren't right now?
Well, I think we're looking at psychedelics probably in a different manner than everyone else. We see that there's, on the one hand, great benefit of these substances on the hallucinogenic therapy side, and that is undeniable. There's a lot of examples of groups working on that. But at the same time, these substances were more or less banned since they became Schedule 1 for significant research. And so the research that has been done has really been on the hallucinogenic effect. And what we're trying to understand from these substances is, can they also be medicines without having a hallucinogenic experience? Are there therapeutic benefits to microdosing? Are there therapeutic benefits to a derivative of one of these substances? And I think traditionally biotech companies and a lot of academic researchers really more or less ignored these substances over the last 50 years because they were Schedule 1. And so we're going to be looking at both benefits. I mean, we see benefits in both. And I think that's vastly different than what anyone else is doing out there.
Right. And it seems to me that most of the research on LSD has been done in Switzerland, and you guys are looking to change that, right? Or change is maybe the wrong word, but you're looking to expand on that.
Yeah, I think we are. I think clearly LSD has a legacy in Switzerland, and I think the Swiss are very proud of what they've achieved. Actually, in the background there, this is a Dean Chamberlain, who's a great artist who's documented a lot of the heroes in the space, and this is signed by Albert Hofmann. I don't know if you can see that.
Beautiful, yeah. Gorgeous.
Really cool artist. This is all done with light painting at Albert's house with a flashlight. But yeah, I was just there about 2 months ago. We were there with the Town and Country reporter who wrote a piece called "The Etiquette of LSD" for Town and Country, Paul Tullis. And I think part of our job and what we're working on is to also destigmatize psychedelics. In the same way that pot became cannabis, the average person in Middle America, or somewhere else in the world, still stigmatizes these, still doesn't see them necessarily as substances that should be a legal substance. And so what we want to do is provide the data and provide a statistically significant argument to the FDA on why they should be medicines. So yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of that work in Switzerland. I think there's a lot of great infrastructure there. Dr. Matthias Lichty has, as a pharmacologist, has done a lot of the initial great work to be the basis of future efficacy studies on LSD.
So did anything surprise you after receiving the research and digging in? I don't know if you've had time to actually do that, but what are some things that you learned about LSD and the research that's gone on with it that hasn't been widely disseminated yet?
Yeah, we've learned a lot, actually.
Yay.
And we are a public company, so I can't necessarily talk about a lot of what we've learned, but everyone should stay tuned because we definitely want to talk more about how we're advancing LSD through this data and how we ultimately want to make medicines that are better for patients, but also helpful to therapists. I think there's a lot of talk about how do you make great medicines for patients, but there's less talk about, hey, how do you improve the situation for therapists so that these are easier to administer. So yeah, we'll be working a lot on improving LSD.
Beautifully said. What is your personal connection? What motivated you to go through this very dense process of an FDA study or just legitimizing psychedelics medicinally in this way?
So I was in Silicon Valley and I was coming out of the Y Combinator program, which is sort of a tech accelerator where companies like Airbnb and Dropbox were all sort of hatched out of. And I was seeing self-driving cars and coffee machines that made my coffee without a barista, and going, where's everybody going to work in 10 years? I was looking at all my friends basically replacing everybody's job. And to me, that was troubling because I saw the opioid crisis. I saw, just mental health issues skyrocketing in America. And I decided that I didn't want to make taxis more efficient or iPhones cheaper, which I had done previously in other companies. And I then saw this report and it said 800 million people are going to lose their job by 2030 due to automation and AI. And I was like, oh boy, we are going to have the biggest existential crisis probably in the history of the planet when this thing all gets done. Well, fast forward, COVID-19 happened, and I think this is going to be happening a lot quicker than I originally thought. And I think we're going to need solutions to mental health and addiction we already need them, but we're going to need them far quicker as this whole process and really, I think, is going to be a tectonic shift in how our economy and society works when we get through with this whole thing. So that was the reason I wanted to work on new forms of medicine.
Amazing. Thank you. That's pretty heavy. And yeah, obviously we're in an accelerated pace now because of the epidemic, and it takes minds like yours and others to really help find solutions as quickly as Mother Nature is pushing us to, if that's how you, at least that's how I see what's happening now. Okay, JR, what should people look out for? How can they find out more about your work and what you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find out more about us on mindmed.co. And we are going to be making a lot of advances in the LSD space. And we want to ultimately become a leader to turn those into FDA-approved medicines one day.
Please.
Look out.
Please.
Look out for us, just getting to work every day to make that happen.
JR, thank you so much for your work and your time and the movement that you're pushing towards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All righty. Up next, we've got Storytime, guys, and then we're going to talk to Decrim California, and then we're going to get into the groovy vibes. Our next guest, Don Lattin, is an award-winning journalist who covers alternative and mainstream spiritual and religious movements and figures in America. He is the author of several books, including the Harvard Psychedelic Club, How Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, Huston Smith, is that Houston Smith? Sorry, guys. Huston Smith, and Andrew Weil. Huston, thank you. Huston and Andrew Weil killed the 50s and ushered in a new age for America. Don, so honored to have you. And read some of your brilliant words from some of your brilliant works.
Thank you, Jackie. It's been really a great program. What a wonderful lineup. Thanks for putting this together. It's just incredible.
Absolutely. So what are you going to read for us today?
Well, I've written 3 books over the last 10 years about, a lot of it's about the sort of social and the kind of cultural history of the psychedelic drug movement. You mentioned the Harvard Psychedelic Club, which is about sort of the real story about what happened with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert getting kicked out of Harvard for their psilocybin research in the early 1960s. The role that Andy Weil played in that, which hadn't really been told before, long before Andy Weil was the famous integral medicine guru.
Right.
And I wrote another book, which I was going to read something from, called Distilled Spirits. So Harvard Psychedelic Club was a group biography of 4 guys who came together at Harvard and really set the stage for the whole psychedelic counterculture of the 1960s. That book did pretty well, and I really loved the group biography format. So I went back into the 50s and did a book about 3 other characters: Aldous Huxley, who of course was very, very influential with writing The Doors of Perception in 1953 about his experiences, and a guy named Gerald Heard, who most people haven't heard of, H-E-A-R-D. He was a close friend and mentor to Aldous Huxley, who was kind of the proto-Leary in the 50s. He turned a lot of influential people onto LSD in the 1950s. And one of the people he turned on was Bill Wilson, who is the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And some people, that story had never really been told fully. And I tell that story in Distilled Spirits, which is this book here. This is Bill Wilson, who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, Aldous Huxley, and this is Gerald Hurd. And so there's a kind of a hidden history in the Alcoholics Anonymous where LSD was considered for a time to be something they could actually use at AA meetings, which is kind of funny because the AA is totally into abstinence from all drugs and alcohol. But there's an interesting little history of the movement when Bill Wilson saw that LSD, the spiritual insight people get, could really help alcoholics sober up. So I was going to read, if you want, a little bit from that section in Distilled Spirits.
I think that's a very important message. So let's do that and then take some questions.
Okay. Let me see here. Okay. Bill Wilson had his first LSD trip at the Los Angeles Veterans Administration Hospital on August 29th, 1956. At the time, everyone from humanistic psychologists to chemical warfare enthusiasts was looking for something to do with the mind-blowing drug that Albert Hofmann first synthesized at his Sandoz lab back in 1938, and of course discovered a few years later. A group of researchers, including Dr. Humphrey Osmond, thought LSD could be used to treat alcoholism. At first, Osmond and his colleagues thought the drug would help them better understand the alcoholic-induced hallucinations. It might terrify drunks into changing their ways. By the time Wilson had his first trip, Osmond had begun to see that it was insight, not terror, that was helping alcoholics mend their destructive ways. At first, this seemed counterintuitive. They were using one drug to overcome addiction to another drug. But they were doing what Wilson and AA had suggested in the second of their 12 steps. They were using mind-expanding drugs to find what the 12 steps describe as, quote, a power greater than ourselves, close quote, that could, quote, restore us to sanity. They were using a drug that mimicked insanity to find sanity. Wilson was nervous about taking LSD, so he turned to his most trusted spiritual advisor. He asked Gerald Hurd to be his guide, a role in which Hurd accompanied many people in the early years of the psychedelic movement. This was 4 years before Timothy Leary had his first trip and anointed himself as the Pied Piper of the psychedelic 60s. Hurd turned on Time publisher Henry Luce, who was probably the most influential media person in the world at the time, and his wife, Claire Booth Luce, a Jesuit theologian named John Courtney Murray, other people, the head of Southern California Edison, and Hurd also inspired Dr. Oscar Yaniger, a Los Angeles psychiatrist, who went on to turn on Cary Grant, James Coburn, and Jack Nicholson, and a lot of Hollywood people. Yaniger said, quote, it was the philosopher Gerald Hurd who introduced me to psychedelics. He told me that the emergence of LSD in the 20th century was simply God's way of giving us the gift of consciousness. He believed that LSD was a device for saving humanity from Armageddon. And you know, there's a great video clip which we couldn't play, but you can find it on my website, which is donlatin.com, on the Harvard Psychedelic Club page, which shows some of these early LSD therapy sessions that they did in the 1950s at the VA hospital in LA. And they interview Hurd after one of these women gives her experience while on an LSD trip. And this is something that Hurd says on that tape, but I'll just read it to you. This is probably something that Hurd might have told Bill Wilson, trying to explain to him what LSD would be like to someone who'd never done it. So Hurd said, I don't know any of our friends who haven't taken it, who haven't said this one thing. Well, I've never seen anything like that in my whole life. First, there are the colors and the beauties, the designs, the way things appear, but that's just the beginning. At some point, you notice that there aren't these separations that we normally feel. We're not on some separate island shouting across, trying to hear what the other is saying. Suddenly, you know empathy. It's flowing underneath us. We're parts of a common continent that meet underneath the water. And with that comes such delight, the sober certainty of waking bliss. So that is probably one of the things that Hurd did to tell Bill about LSD. And I'll just finish with this one little few more paragraphs. So on Bill Wilson's first LSD trip, they took notes, right? And from the notes, it shows what his thinking was. So his thinking going into this session, I mean, Bill Wilson had been sober for 20 years, so he didn't use LSD to get sober, but he thought it could help other people. So his thinking into the session was that it might do this, and that it might help overcome his depression, because he suffered from depression. And this is long before they had, this new wave of antidepressants. So he thought LSD might help him with his depression and his addiction to alcohol, which is what killed him in the end. Was his addiction, his addiction to tobacco, which is what killed him in the end. So Gerald Hurd took hourly notes from this August 29th session, and it revealed that the trip did little to keep Bill away from cigarettes. So at 1 p.m., Bill Wilson reports a feeling of peace. And then at 2:31, he says he's happier than he's ever been and proclaimed, "Tobacco is not necessary for me anymore." And then at 3:23, he asked for a cigarette. So it was just a great example of how some of the insight we sometimes have on psychedelics, they don't always translate into changes in our behavior, which is what's really important. But a few months later, Wilson did write about his LSD session, and he said, quote, "More and more, it appears to me that the experience has done me a sustained good. My reactions to things totally and in particular have very definitely improved for no other reason than I can see." So, so there was a period where, like I said, they thought about actually using LSD at AA meetings. They talked about that, decided not to do it. And what happened is kind of the 60s happened, and then suddenly LSD got this other reputation. You have to remember, in the 50s, LSD was legal. People who'd heard of it thought it was a promising new tool to help people with addiction, other issues. So the 60s kind of got in the way of that, like a lot of things in terms of research into psychedelics. So that's just one little reading from Distilled Spirits.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, Distilled Spirits, people can get that. We've had a lot of questions about where people can find your books. I know synergeticpress.com.
Yeah, my last book, which is Changing Our Minds, which is by Synergetic Press. And this is a guide to the whole current scene with psychedelic research, the stuff that MAPS is doing with MDMA, and the work with psilocybin.
Yeah, we're going to give away, FYI to the audience, we're going to give away his book, Changing Our Minds.
Changing Our Minds. Yeah, Michael Pollan has a book that did a little better than mine with a slightly similar title about a year later.
Well, we're happy to give away your book.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so as one of the final speakers of today, on today's program, what have we not touched on that you think is super important in your breadth of work and research over the last years in terms of psychedelics and how they can help affect mental health positively, but also just affect us culturally?
Well, I was really glad when you had, Mitch talking about, safety issues and all that. I was a little concerned that, that people are so excited about psychedelics right now for good reason. They can do amazing good, but I think you have to insert a little caution into this. Because, I write in the Harvard Psychedelic Club, I write an afterword about how I had some beautiful experiences as a 19-year-old on LSD, but then I had a really hard experience, which kind of kicked off a 2-month period of some real psychological trouble for me. And so I wish I had a guide. I wish I had someone I could talk to back then, to really work through the bad trip, because the bad trips can be the best trips sometimes, but only if you have someone to help you. So I think that's an important thing, just to proceed with caution, especially with LSD, which is a very powerful drug, and you have to be careful with it. So that's one thing. And also, I love one of the things that Houston Smith said about psychedelics. He talked about the altered states versus altered traits. Altered states of consciousness are one thing. They're a beautiful thing. You can get them with psychedelics. You can get them with meditation, other spiritual practices. That's great. But what really is important are altered traits. Do the experiences that you have on psychedelics make you a better person, a more compassionate person? Are you, how does it affect the way you act in your marriage or your job or with your friends? So I think that's just an important thing to remember. And that's all about integrating the psychedelic experience and making ourselves better people, more compassionate people, more connected people, feeling more gratitude, which they certainly have done for me in my personal experience with these medicines.
Beautifully said. We have a question from Emily Samuels. Thank you, Emily. Don, what are some of your favorite psychedelic books for those looking to add to their collection?
You mentioned in terms of Hofmann, you mentioned another synergetic mystic chemist, which is a wonderful book. I interviewed Dieter Hagenbach. He died a few years ago, but shortly before he died, I was in Switzerland. I went to Franz Woldenheimer's lab. You're talking about the research he's doing in Zurich. And I met Dieter and had a wonderful afternoon with him walking around Zurich. So this is, I think, it's a coffee table book with great pictures. So it really is a wonderful book. Another one, Dennis McKenna has done some great work on this. Of course, his brother Terrence. Everybody knows about Terrence's work. There's lots of good work out there. I think my last book, Changing Our Minds, I think it's a pretty good overview of the whole scene. So I'd recommend that. It's kind of more of an insider's guide to what's going on than Michael Pollan's book, because he didn't have a lot of experience himself in these realms. But there's all kinds of great books coming out right now. There's just been a flood of them.
Copy. So we're going to give away, again, one of your books, probably in the next segment. So my team send me a winner. One last question. Someone wrote in. Thank you for writing in. I know it's hard to tell, but how far off do you think till mainstream schools teach psychedelic therapy?
Well, it's already happening, actually. I mean, it depends how you define mainstream, but I live in the East Bay, across the bay from San Francisco. And over in the city, there's a school called the California Institute of Integral Studies, and they have a whole program training psychedelic therapists. They've been doing it for 3 or 4 years. So I think that's starting to happen. And of course, what's also happening is a lot of research institutions, medical schools, like Johns Hopkins has become a leader in this. You can't get much more mainstream than that, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. So there's definitely been a sea change in the last 10 years. Since I wrote Harvard Psychedelic Club, I wrote these 3 books over the last 10 years, and it's been such an incredible change in just 10 years. I think a lot of it is people who came of age in the 60s, like me. I'm 67. I caught the tail end of it. A lot of these people are now running things, right? They're running,
Exactly.
university departments. They're running research labs. They're working for the FDA. I mean, that's actually what happened. There were some key people who got into the FDA who were sympathetic to this some years ago. So it's all, it's real people make these decisions. And so many of us had life-changing experiences in the 60s and 70s as young people with psychedelics. And now some of us are in a position to do something about it and appreciate the potential of these medicines.
Awesome. Don, we really appreciate having you on today and all the work that you've done. Look forward to future books. Do you have anything in the works coming up?
I'm playing around with a little fiction. I don't want to say
fun.
any more about it, but playing around is the key word, because I'm a journalist, not a fiction writer, but I'm just having some fun with that right now.
I'd love to hear that. Where can people find out more about your work?
Best place be my website, which is donlatin, DONLATTIN.com. And you can find the books. I encourage people to go to independent bookstores rather than Amazon.com, but you can get them anywhere.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Thank you, Don. I
You're
appreciate you.
Great program. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Don. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting close to our visual sound experience coming up. But before that, I'm super happy to bring on Ryan from Decrim, California. He has been prolific in the past with helping to legalize cannabis throughout the state from municipality to municipality. So he knows the inner workings of what it takes to actually get on the ballot and to move the needle and sift through the bureaucracy. So we're super excited, of course, to sponsor them today. Go to decrimca.org to donate and learn more about how you can get involved. And also you can donate on Venmo at Meet_Delic. Ryan, I'm so happy and honored and excited to have you on.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Can you hear me? Am I coming through okay?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay,
Tell us
perfect.
what's going on. Tell us what has happened, what's transpired, and can we see, are we going to see it on the ballot in 2020?
Odds are probably not. With the COVID-19 virus outbreak, we got notices that we basically had to stop canvassing and we had to stop collecting signatures because it actually increases the chance of plague. So what ended up happening was we reached out to a series of other initiatives in the state that are going through the same thing, because they were able to collect, 25 or 50% of the signatures. But when you get paused out in the middle of a campaign, you only have 6 months to roughly get 623,212 valid signatures. So you actually aim for 1 million, because basically 1 out of 3 signatures is going to come back invalid because either A, they're not registered to vote, B, they forgot where they're registered to vote, or C, they didn't fill out the form completely. So what ended up happening is by reaching out to these other initiatives, one of them in particular is an initiative for electronic signatures for recalls, referendums, and initiatives. And we partnered with them to actually try to push the state of California to allow for online electronic signatures. We don't think that's going to happen just because there's so much chaos right now in government. Honestly, they're focusing on saving people's lives and not just pushing new laws going forward. But what will happen is we're now partnering with the electronic signature campaign, and we're going to merge with another one to try to do both electronic signatures for recalls, referendums, initiatives, and for voting. So we're going to push that one for the 2022 election scene, and we're going to have to make another push with ours as well. So the craziest thing is we have over 1,300 volunteers. We're in all 58 counties. We were crushing it as it was, and we would have gotten on the ballot at least, not necessarily won, but gotten it on the ballot if it hadn't been for the plague. So the advanced thing about that as well is we're now talking to other states that are also going through the same issue, and we're thinking about doing a national push for electronic signatures. And that would basically change the entry point for a lot of different activist organizations, because one of the costs is it costs about $1.5 to $2 million just to get it on the ballot in a state like California. If you're able to actually drop the barrier cost for entry to virtually nothing, and you could run campaigns online virtually like this, you might actually be able to make a lot of change in a lot of different areas. So the other 24 states that have this possibility, there was a lot of initiatives that were going in for cannabis that got knocked down for another 2 years. So I imagine we're going to end up partnering with a lot of them going forward as well. So that's where we're at, basically.
So it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort to decriminalize these things, right? You have tons of volunteers. You learned a lot from working within the system, helping to decriminalize cannabis. What did you learn from that process, and what are you bringing to the table in this new psilocybin decriminalization effort?
Basically, we have the numbers of volunteers. We have the language that's done. We have a $40,000 poll that ranks every single section of the language, so we know how to market it. Going forward, because this isn't a standard election season for 2022, that's going to be a non-presidential election. Generally, it's more conservative people that come out to vote for that, because if you pay, like, for example, if you're a landowner and you pay taxes on your home, you're definitely going to be a voter. They get really pissed about that. So generally, it's conservative people that are generally older that have this. So one component in our language is it's available to do cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and consumption if you're over the age of 18. If we have to refile the language again, which we will have to do for 2022, we might bump the age up to 21 just because we know we're going into a conservative year. As far as things I learned, I mean, it's weird. It's like we have every single thing we need for the campaign done now, and I basically have like 2.5 years to redo the campaign. So we're just going to keep building up our numbers. We're going to go get more money. Thank you so much for doing this and donating to us as well. It's just wonderful how you came through for us. And yeah, just keep building the team and keep pushing it. And then we will open up the language for a few more critiques and edits, because we've had time to go over that even since we filed it initially. So there'll be a few tweaks here and there. And it's an open source campaign. So that was the best thing about this, was just honestly meeting all these awesome, amazing people all over the state that we never would have gotten to otherwise.
So where can people actually sign, or do you need signatures still?
We do, but there's no way we're going to make the cut the way it's working right now, because the cutoff is in 2 days. We need 750,000 extra signatures in order to make that happen. The best thing for them to do, honestly, is go and volunteer. The way we operate as volunteer systems, we sign you up using a Google form. It's on our website. Just go to decrimca.org/volunteer. There's the breakdown of how it all works. We then dial you in. You get access to our Slack channels, and specifically your county if you want to organize at the local level as well, and just network with people. And also the education that we were doing, because our biggest focus was actually teaching people how to cultivate magic mushrooms as our educational outreach. So for example, in a pound of dried mushrooms, there's 454 grams. If you're to do a microdose There's 100 to 250 milligrams is a proper microdose. If you're going to do a regular dose, as most people would consider themselves a psilocybe cubensis, is 3.5 grams. If you're going to do a heroic dose, it's 5 grams total. So if you were to take the number of doses that you get at a heroic dose level out of a pound, there's literally 90 doses. The initial cost to actually cultivate magic mushrooms, it's about $125 worth of gear. And then after that, every pound of mushrooms produced dry weight is between $7 to $11. So if you're on the high end at $10, the cost per 5-gram heroic dose would actually be 11 to 12 cents. That's pretty good. And teaching people how to do that and making sure nobody goes to jail for it as the top of the list. And the amnesty and expungement component, we're the only ones that actually even have that in our language. So that was a big piece of it and ate up about a third of the length of it total.
So is it true to say that so the spores, owning psilocybin spores, mushroom spores to grow them, is actually legal in most of the states, I think, except for 2 or 3, California being one of them. Is that still true?
That's correct.
Okay.
If our language goes through, though, you could then have spores in state, but you still wouldn't be able to ship product in or out of the state. That's a federal issue because of the mail. And then also you wouldn't be able to bank properly with it simply because the banks are controlled by FDIC insurance. So that's federal. So they don't want to take the risk on it. So it's a lot of the same madness you'd have to deal with like when the cannabis market really started turning on back in 2016.
Copy. Oh, we have a question from Del. Hey, Del. What's up, Del? Nice to see you. Del has been an amazing guest on Delic Radio before, unreleased. I'll release that next week, actually, and is a super anthropologist and scientist. He asks, I think to you, Ryan, I'd like to do this in municipalities in the short term. Is it possible to get access to your materials to craft local legislation?
Yes, it is. There's actually a universal document that we key off of, which is actually the California version 4.4. You can find our initiative language on our page. Just to go to decrimca.org/initiative. There's a copy that shows what the actual petition is if you did want to print it out and mail it back to us signed. But then there's also the language broken down so it's much easier to read in full text size. So it's at the bottom of decrimca.org/initiative. And the thing is, you have to understand when California started going for back in 2015 to 2016, turning on all the different state initiatives, there was like over 14 or 15 of them that actually filed. And a lot of them didn't make it on the ballot. Only one made it on the ballot, in fact, and that was the Adult Use Marijuana Act, Prop 64. But leading up to that, what ended up happening is a lot of counties and cities started to panic because they saw the state turning on, and they decided to run a series of moratoriums in both cities and counties, shutting it down if they wanted to. So you just have to be aware that when you stir this hornet's nest up, you can really activate a lot of politicians in a negative way as well. There was, in fact, after Decriminalize Nature pulled it off, as well as Decriminalize Denver, there was a woman in Canada at their equivalent of like a city council meeting that was actually trying to put a moratorium on psilocybin because she was afraid there was going to be a huge wave coming in. So just keep that in mind. And also, our language, you have to understand every state has its own set of laws and codes you'd have to clean up. So you can use ours as like a philosophical base to begin with. And there's 3 things you need to take into account when you're turning on a proper decriminalization or legalization effort. The first one is the actual quality of the substance. Is it good? Is it what you're actually getting? The second one is the availability and access of the substance. Can everybody get to it that needs it? Both rich people, middle income class people, and poor people, and then everybody else in between there. And then the third one is the actual price of the substance. Because if the price is too high, that excludes it from people, even if they do have access to it in their area. So as long as you focus on those 3 things, meaning it's easily accessible, it's high quality, and the price is decent, then you're going to have a good system of language. And then the other thing is, my advice would be to open source it amongst all the key stakeholders in your area. Just create a Google Drive document, let everybody put in their notes on the side, and you just keep revising it over and over and over again. And then when everybody has a consensus on it, which you're never really going to entirely get, but when the majority of the right people have a consensus on it, the ones you respect that are intelligent, then you start submitting it.
Got it. Do you know of any other states besides Denver, California, and Washington that have or intend to start decriminalization efforts?
I've been contacted by people from Nevada, Washington State, probably some of the same ones, Hawaii. There's like 3 different groups of people in Hawaii that are talking about doing it. I got contacted by British Columbia in Canada. I guess they have a system where they can do citizens initiatives there. I know there's some people in Arizona talking about it. I know there's people in New Jersey and certainly Michigan. They're talking about it out there at a statewide level, and they're learning. I started out basically in the legal game of trying to turn on cannabis. Back in the day, it was called marijuana in Michigan, and so I got to see what the scene was like out there. And it's different because some states, if they're really rich, they don't really take the argument that like this is going to be good for the economy or better. States that are very poor, they sometimes tend to be very conservative. There's a lot of different components to it. So we were down to help anybody, honestly. If they want some advice, just hit us up.
Amazing. Couple more questions, then we're going to do an amazing giveaway. And then we're going to get into Visual Reality's Bicycle Day sound movement. Okay, one question. Can you explain the difference between legalizing and decriminalizing?
Well, there's many different flavors of legalization that really exist out there. So, for example, you had Prop 215 in California, which is technically a medical cooperative model. You then had Prop 64, which was adult use, which is code for recreational. That falls under the category of like total cognitive liberty. Like you should be able to do whatever you want to your body, be it good or bad. And the definitional distinction between like legalization and decriminalization for the most part is just generally everything except for sales. That's generally the issue. And when it gets down to true legalization, in all honesty, all the states that are even legal for cannabis aren't even really legal for cannabis. It's quasi-legal. It's a gray market issue because you still can't do all the normal stuff you would need to do as a federal business. So our version, we push legalization as close as we possibly can get, but still by definition, it's not really entirely there. So, I mean, every single component, for example, you can cultivate this, you can manufacture it, you can distribute it, you can possess it, you can transport it, you can consume it by our language if it was to pass through. The taxational component that went wrong with cannabis, for example, they taxed you at cultivation, then they compounded the tax into manufacturing. Then you didn't get any write-offs from the federal government except for cost of goods sold when it came to wholesale distribution. And then when it actually got to the local municipality level, be it a city or a county, they would not only charge you the local sales tax, but then they would also compound a tax on top of that, was the sin tax, comprised of all the other taxes packaged together. So at the end, that's why in a legal market like in California with cannabis, you're paying $60 an eighth, when in reality, you should be paying more like $20 an eighth for a gray market dispensary. And what we know is the harder you make it for people to get access to the substance, the more of a black market will exist. And that dynamic between black market and gray market will just keep tearing at each other, and that will also tear apart families. So in all honesty, our language is as close to legalization as you could get. And if you were to compare it to, for example, the language we have for Prop 64 in California, it's a cleaner, more elegant version of legalization than probably anything else that's ever been seen out there. And the reason this language came into existence, because it's actually, we basically modeled everything that went wrong with cannabis. Let's not do that for a single psychedelic substance and try this one out or start as a little experiment and see if it actually works. So there you go.
Ryan, thank you so much. Really, thank you for putting in the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears to make this happen. We appreciate you. Guys, go check out decrimca.org and, of course, all the other decrim organizations across the country. Before we go and get into our groovy sound presentation by Visual Reality, we want to thank everyone for coming together today. Bicycle Day, Meet Delic Bicycle Day 2020. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We're honored to have you as a part of the community. Of course, realitysandwich.com is an ongoing resource with over 10,000 pieces of content on there that are completely free. We make no money from Reality Sandwich. Go to Reality Sandwich, dig around. There's amazing substance guides there, other intellectual pieces as well. We're launching thedelic.com next week, which is a boutique online super fun content and shopping platform, thedelic.com. And of course, Meet Delic. This is all because of Meet Delic, the first ever psychedelic wellness summit that we will hold August 8th and 9th, one way or another. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you. We love you. Never forget, you are the one. It's all about you. You are the guru. Yes, all one, all love, one love. Before we get into visual reality, let's give away this amazing, amazing gift from our homie Sherbinsky, Mario Guzman. He donated a pair of signed boxing shorts from Emmanuel Pacquiao, who of course is a Filipino professional boxer and politician, currently serving as a senator of the Philippines since 2016. Pacquiao is regarded by many boxing historians as one of the greatest professional boxers of all time. The giveaway is autographed boxing shorts by Manny himself, or signed by Manny himself, donated, of course, by Mario Guzman, aka Sherbinsky, our homie. Thank you so much, my friend, from his private collection. So what we're gonna do is we're going to give those away to the largest donation that donates to Decrim California. You can donate on Venmo, Meet-Delic, that's at Meet-Delic. Thank you guys for your donations. We know it's a hard time for people. Any amount is amazing, $1, $5, whatever. But even if you can't donate right now, thank you for joining and spending your time. We want you to have an amazing bicycle day. I'm your host, Jackie Stang. Without further ado, we're gonna get into some groovy sound stylings by our friends over at Visual Reality. So tune in, turn on, and drop out.
beyond differences which you the world around them. Completely with a basic energy process. No images. No pleasure or fear. Experience. The drop of water. There is energy, light, the network of process. All boundaries dissolve. Second and longest phase. Of gain visions and revelation. Part of your ego and a multitude of sounds are created and dissipated at fantastic speed. Both heaven and hell, or torture, may be experienced. Come from you. Is that of re-entry or re-imprinting? To the body. Rebuild every day reality. As you reach unimaginable, remember these three phases and try. Do not attempt to. Let it flow and enjoy the. You will be returning soon enough. There's plenty of time for figuring it all out there. Turn your attention to your body. Of every cell in your body. No sensations are pulsating through your limbs. The energy process may cause your body to tremble or to feel cold or to feel pressure in your head. Passes through the Earth's atmosphere and is freely through space. These are the light with the trembling and the warm pulsing. To get out of yourself. Consciously. speed of light. Float beyond fear. Float beyond desire. Into this mystery of mysteries. Through this gate of all wonder. Open, naked eye. Drift within on a thread of sound. Light, radiant, pulsing. ancient thread. You are light. You are sound. plenty of time for figuring it all out later. Turn your attention to your body. Try to become conscious of every cell in your body. Notice how various unusual sensations are pulsating through your limbs. The flow of the energy process may cause your body to tremble, or to feel hot, or cold, or to feel pressure in your head. Just as a spaceship passes through the Earth's atmosphere and is subjected to unusual pressures before it can fly freely through space, so your consciousness, in separating from the physical frame of reference, may cause you to experience various unusual bodily sensations. These are the landmarks of the transition points of consciousness. Or disintegrate into vibrations of pure energy. Let happen whatever happens. Don't struggle or try to control. Accept. private personality, which will return to you at the end of this voyage. The goal of this trip is ecstasy. To move outside the boundaries of normal perception and consciousness into the far reaches of your nervous system. As you begin this journey, you must be ready to accept the possibility that there is an infinite range of awarenesses for which we now have no words. That awareness can expand beyond the range of your ego, yourself, your familiar identity, beyond everything you have learned, beyond your notions of space and time, beyond the differences which usually separate people from each other and from the world around them. There are three main stages in this voyage. The first and most profound is called the experience of clear light, or the void. Here, you merge completely with a basic energy process. There are no thoughts, no images, no hallucination, no pleasure or fear, no I to experience. The drop of water is merged in the ocean. There is energy, light, flow, the network process. You are gone. All boundaries dissolved. The second, longest stage is called the period of hallucination, of gain visions and revelations. Part of your ego has reasserted itself. A multitude of sounds, images, thoughts are created and dissipated at fantastic speed. Both heaven and hell, paradise or torture may be experienced. Both come from you. Third phase is that of re-entry, of rebirth, or re-imprinting, where your ego strives to return to the body, to rebuild its familiar, everyday reality. As you reach unimagined levels of awareness, try to remember these three phases and try to recognize where you are.